All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's technical workshop on wastewater system health and operations. My name is Darcy Peth. I work for Raw Strategic, and we are contractors to the King County Wastewater Treatment Division. Welcome to the workshop. This workshop is a bilingual event. Please look at your Zoom toolbar and click on the interpretation button and select either English or Spanish. And a quick note as we settle in, as you know, we have made it our practice to conduct native land and labor acknowledgement at our workshops as a way of creating healing and peace for past actions that stripped Native communities of their ancestral lands. We have learned that some Native American and tribal organizations may have some concerns about this practice. In the interest of seeking harmony and demonstrating respect with those who express concerns, we will be temporarily suspending the delivery of native land acknowledgements at workshops until we have been provided more clarity on how to proceed. We appreciate your understanding. Next slide. All participants should select the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and pick either English or Spanish. To hear Spanish audio of the workshop, you must join by computer. Using either computer speakers or headphones, Spanish interpretation will not be available if you dial in using only your phone. Spanish listeners can mute the English audio by clicking on Mute Original Audio under Interpretation. English and Spanish closed captioning will be available. English will be available through the live transcript button. Spanish will be available through a link in the chat window. Next slide. And as we start the presentation, we want to cover a few tips on how to participate in this webinar. First, you're all muted, which we've done to reduce background noise to improve everybody's experience. If you can't hear us well, you can adjust your volume by clicking the microphone on the bottom left. If you have technical issues or questions about connecting to the webinar, you can click on the chat option in the toolbar. This will send a chat message to the webinar hosts. Turn on closed captions by clicking on Live Transcript CC button. To ask questions about the presentations, click on the Q&A icon in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Note that this is different from the chat box, and we request that you use the Q&A box for your questions to help us make sure that we get a chance to read your question aloud. You can submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we will answer as many as we can during the designated Q&A portions of the workshop. Please be sure to type your question using complete sentences so that we can understand it clearly when we read it aloud. We may not have time to get to all the questions today, but you can follow up afterward by emailing cleanwaterplan@kingcounty.gov. If you prefer to participate verbally, please click on the raise hand icon. And during those designated Q&A portions of the workshop, if time allows, we will call on you and unmute you so you may speak your question. Within a few weeks after the workshop, a recording will be posted online, as well as the slides. And again, this workshop is a bilingual event. If you've not already done so, click on the interpretation button on your Zoom toolbar and select either English or Spanish. And please note that our presenters will be speaking a bit slower than usual to help ease our interpretation. Okay, we're going to start off with a couple of quick questions to help us get to know you all a little bit. I'm going to share a Zoom pop-up window, and we ask that you select the one option that best describes you. So, what type of organization are you with? Government, wastewater focused, government, non-wastewater focused, tribe, community-based organization, consultant or private business, or other? Okay, looks like most of you have had a chance to vote. So I'll go ahead and share those results. All right, so looks like most of us are government wastewater focused, with another 12% consultant or private business, 10% government non-wastewater focused, 3% tribe, and 5% other. Thanks very much. For those folks who have just joined us, I wanted to repeat to address a question about our usual practice of conducting a Native land and labor acknowledgement that we usually do. We've learned that some Native American and tribal organizations may have some concerns about that practice. And in the interest of seeking harmony and demonstrating respect with those who have expressed those concerns, we will be temporarily suspending the delivery of native land acknowledgements at workshops until we've been provided more clarity on how to proceed. We appreciate your understanding. Okay, thanks everyone for participating in our first quick question. Next slide. We now have our second quick question. This one is, did you attend the first Clean Water Plan Actions Technical Workshop on April 20th? So answer yes or no. Give you just a few more moments if you haven't voted yet. Okay, thanks very much. Looks like 62% did attend that workshop and 38% did not. So we appreciate all of you being here, whether you did or did not attend that workshop. All right, we'll have, thank you for participating in those quick questions. We will have a few more throughout today's workshop in which we'll answer some just for fun trivia questions. Here is a look at today's agenda. As we created today's workshop, we looked at some of the feedback that some of you provided after workshop number 1 and incorporated some of your suggestions. So thank you for providing those. Our presentations today will summarize some of the information in the document, Actions Characterizing Water Quality Investment Options, which you will hear referred to as the Actions document. Section and page number references will be provided when the slides are posted online. So we're going to start today with background information on the Clean Water Plan and an overview of asset management, resiliency, and redundancy key concepts and actions before our first Q&A session. We'll then have our first break. Then we'll hear about conveyance system key concepts and actions, followed by a second Q&A session, and then have our second break. We will then hear about resource recovery key concepts and actions and have a third opportunity for Q&A. At that point, the workshop will be concluded and you are welcome to leave, but for those who wish to participate, our presenters and SMEs will stick around for an additional optional Q&A time. If you've got more questions that we didn't get a chance to address at that point, we'll be taking questions related to any of the topics from across today's workshop. Next slide. This slide lists the people you will be hearing from today. From King County, we'll hear from Steve Tolsman, Tiffany Knapp, Nicole Smith, and Sonia Lena Binahar. We'll also hear from expert technical consultants, Ian McKelvey and Elizabeth Lowell. I'm Darcy Peth, and we'll facilitate the workshop today. We also have a number of subject matter experts who will be available during each of the Q&A sessions to answer technical questions related to their area of expertise. Next slide. Here are a few things to keep in mind for context as you hear today's presentations. These workshops are taking place in the middle of the planning process. At this stage, we have built and characterized a range of potential options using substantial engagement and analysis. This is the second in a series of 3 workshops focused on explaining those potential options or actions. Engagement so far has included tables at fairs and festivals, webinars, an in-person workshop, engagement with community-based organizations, an ongoing external advisory group, and more. The scope of the programs we're exploring and the methods used to characterize them are the result of input from the community and subject matter experts inside and outside of King County. Next slide. We chose an exploratory planning process for the Clean Water Plan that involves looking at a range of different water quality investment approaches to guide future investments. This process will allow the county to fully investigate the potential for better water quality outcomes. This workshop series has been structured to provide details and background on this step of the process, actions, so that interested parties have foundational information about the choices and opportunities. You may still have questions after the workshop. Please send those to cleanwaterplan@kingcounty.gov. Next slide. All right, so we're going to start our presentations now, starting off with Clean Water Plan background information. Next slide, please. To start off this presentation, we're going to do another quick question. How familiar are you with the clean water planning process? Our options are very familiar, somewhat familiar, not very familiar, not at all familiar, or not sure, you don't know. All right. Okay, thanks very much for participating in that. Looks like about half of you are somewhat familiar, followed by roughly a tie between very familiar and not very familiar. And then 2% not all familiar and 2% not sure, don't know. Again, everyone is definitely welcome at this workshop, regardless of your level of familiarity. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sonia.
Thanks, Darcy. So this next section will sound familiar to those who attended the first workshop, so 62% of you. And next we're going to share a new video about the Clean Water Plan that will walk through an overview of the planning process, as well as some grounding information about the actions and the water quality investment options that the county could take during this exploratory planning process. So for those of you who have been here before, just take a back seat, another time to digest the information that we're sharing again. But these next few slides will look familiar to you. So next we'll start off with the video.
Clean water is what makes the Northwest special. Puget Sound and our lakes, rivers, and streams give us food, transportation, jobs, and fun. Why should you care about wastewater in our region? King County's wastewater system is vital to our community. It collects and cleans the water that people send down the drain and protects public health in our rivers, lakes, and Puget Sound. The Clean Water Plan will guide King County investments that protect our waterways, the environment, and public health for decades to come. King County has tough decisions to make about the future of our regional wastewater system. We need to plan for current and proposed regulations, fixing aging pipes, pumps, and tanks, population growth, and how to pay for the investments which will cost billions of dollars in the coming decades. While doing this, we need to keep other important issues like equity and social justice, our future climate, and costs in mind. And your voice matters. The Clean Water Plan process will allow us to thoughtfully navigate the different choices and opportunities so we make the right investments at the right time for public health and the region's rivers, lakes, and Puget Sound going forward. Here's how the planning process works and how you can make your voice heard about the issues that matter to you. First, we look at different choices and opportunities that need attention across our wastewater system. Things like how we move wastewater to the treatment plants, how we clean it when it gets there, how we manage extra water during wet weather, how we care for our aging system, how we recycle treated wastewater, how we clean up historical pollution, and keep new pollutants out of our wastewater. To build the Clean Water Plan, we are exploring a range of actions to address our wastewater and water quality challenges. Actions are the moldable building blocks that will be shaped and combined through the planning process. Understanding individual actions is a start, but we also need to look at how they interact over time and how they affect water quality. The next step in the Clean Water Plan process is to put individual actions together into strategies, which are different complete approaches to investing in water quality and our regional wastewater system. We developed several strategies that will help us explore the choices, opportunities, challenges, and results of each approach. Then, King County uses what we learned from both the community and technical analysis to assemble a single preferred strategy and financial plan. Finally, King County Council votes on a final plan. All along the way, community input is vital. Since the 2018 decision to begin a clean water planning process, King County has invited public input. Community priorities and equity considerations help shape the developing plan. As we move forward, we invite continued input through future workshops, questionnaires, public comments, and participation at every step. Thank you for exploring the Clean Water Plan with us. Please get in touch. Find out more at kingcounty.gov/Clean Water Plan.
Great, thank you. So you may know after watching this video and attending past workshops and activities, the Clean Water Plan is an exploratory process. And through this process, we're working on interrelated complex problems. They're listed on your screen, and we call them the Clean Water Plan decision areas. This slide shows a complete list of the decision areas that the county is exploring. And today we'll be covering the ones highlighted on your screen. The first is capacity in sewer pipes and pumps. We also call this the wastewater conveyance decision area. The second is aging sewer systems, natural disasters, and climate change. This is also known as the asset management, resiliency, and redundancy decision area. And lastly, recycling resources from wastewater, which is also known as the resource recovery decision area. So you'll hear those kind of interchange throughout the presentations. So we'll be talking about the range of new and different options under the 3 decision areas I just mentioned. And to reiterate, for those who are new here, what do we mean by actions? Actions are specific programs or sets of projects that address one of the decision areas that the plan needs to consider. Actions are designed to address particular wastewater or water quality challenges. And you should know that actions are not standalone water quality solutions. They are building blocks that will be shaped and combined in different ways throughout the planning process. And you also might notice that the Clean Water Plan is exploring some actions that would require significant changes in how we do things. We are also exploring actions that are consistent with our current practices. So during this process, they'll provide us with a wide range of options so that in the next step of the planning process, strategies, we can pull together a complete picture of what water quality investment approaches could look like. And today we are sharing a technical characterization of the actions we're exploring. And we did this to help us understand what would happen if a specific action were implemented. So we did not collect any new data or complete any new water quality characterizations. Instead, for actions that are directly linked to past and existing county or regional activities, we relied on historical plans, reports, and project informations from King County and other entities in the region. For actions that are new concepts for the county, we looked at programs in the nation and industry case studies and trends. And here are the actions considerations continued. When we talk about water quality performance estimates, we are looking at those listed on your screen: water quality parameter load reductions, pathways for how pollution enters the waterways, and the water bodies most likely to be affected from the actions we are exploring. Additionally, we also developed conceptual program planning estimates for the 40-year planning horizon to provide an understanding of the order of magnitude of funding that we would need for the conceptual program. And I'll dig a little bit deeper into the water quality and program planning estimate characterizations in just a moment. All right, so first we want to talk about what we mean by water quality parameters. Water quality parameters are things like bacteria, nutrients, heavy metals, suspended solids, organic chemicals, and flow. These parameters were selected because of their potential connection to human and aquatic health endpoints. We also considered the potential impact they have on the environment and water quality, and any linkages to identified water quality impairments. These parameters that the county activities could plausibly influence and where data is available to measure and describe their impacts. And when selecting these parameters, we also considered ongoing and parallel King County water quality related efforts. And when exploring the range of actions the county could take, we saw how each of the actions performed across these water quality parameters. It should also be noted that all load reductions and potential for flow reductions were estimated quantitatively, except for any actions that had the potential reduction in contaminants of emerging concerns, or CECs. These were described qualitatively because current loading is not well documented. So what you see on your screen are the pathways that transport pollutants into Puget Sound rivers and lakes in our region. So for example, wastewater treatment plants treat sewage from homes and businesses and discharge it to the environment. Combined sewer overflows are overflows of untreated wastewater and stormwater. Some pipes carry both sewage and stormwater to a treatment plant. And when heavy rain fills these pipes, they can overflow into local water bodies to prevent backups into homes and businesses. And for stormwater, this is the rain that runs off streets, parking lots, lawns, and sidewalks and picks up pollutants. Stormwater can also run off of fields and other lands in rural areas. And when we talk about contaminated sediments, this is the sediment, the soil or sand at the bottom of a water body. And in some parts of the region, these sediments are contaminated from past industrial and commercial activities. So what water bodies are the plan considering? The Clean Water Plan is considering the pathways that have potential impacts to multiple water bodies in our region. And we're considering the following list on your screen of water bodies. When we're looking at characterizing actions, we identified which of these water bodies are most likely affected by the action. And to ground you further in the planning process, we want to acknowledge that many of you are interested in understanding the impacts to human health and aquatic endpoints. For example, impacts to recreation, shellfish, harvesting edible fish. And in these workshops, we are characterizing actions using data focused on specific pollutants. For example, metals or PCBs, and the amount of water that carries these into our local water bodies. But that's just the beginning. And in future phases of the Clean Water Plan process, we'll put individual actions together into complete strategies. Then we'll be able to explore the broader impact that these strategies have on water quality, including benefits to people, salmon, and orcas. And that brings us to our next topic, which is how are water quality parameter loads estimated for the plan? Estimates of water quality parameter load reductions were determined by developing estimates of concentration and flow rates. For the wastewater treatment and for the decision areas that we'll be discussing today, this includes historical data of flows entering and leaving the treatment plants, regional water quality monitoring data, and other available literature. And based on specific components or activities or projects within the action, we determine the changed conditions such as changes in population or treatment approaches, and use this to estimate potential change in water quality parameter loads. And later in this workshop, you'll learn more about conceptual program planning estimates of the actions. But we wanted to share up front how these estimates for specific components, projects, or activities of the actions were developed. So we used costs from existing King County studies and historical costs, revenues, and standard labor rates. We looked at information from comparable programs or projects in other areas of the US. The estimates that we'll be showing you today are for the full 40-year planning horizon, and they're shown with an accuracy range from lowest to most optimistic, plus 150%. And these estimates are based on guidance provided by the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, and they account for the uncertainty in cost estimating at a planning level concept, as well as how the scope and details could be impacted over the 40-year planning horizon. And the purpose of these conceptual program planning estimates are to provide us with an understanding for the order of magnitude of funding that would be needed to implement this action. And on your screen, you'll see the program planning estimate components that can be broken down. These estimates for each of the actions can be found in a document that we've been updating for each workshop. This is called the Actions Characterizing Water Quality Investment Options, which is available on our Clean Water Plan library. We also updated it to include information that we'll be presenting in this workshop. The conceptual so I'm just going to go through these estimate components. The conceptual capital are the estimates for both new infrastructure and soft costs like design, labor, and permitting. Operations and maintenance and administrative are things like labor, energy, materials, staff time, which are the costs required to operate infrastructure or administer a program after the action is implemented. Rehabilitation and replacement costs are the expenses incurred to maintain the system as the infrastructure ages and wears. Avoided costs are those that are incurred when currently planned capital or operating expenses are deferred temporarily or permanently. For example, if a pipeline capacity project could be deferred due to the implementation of a satellite treatment facility, for example. And changes in revenue, these are any increases to the revenue streams because of new fees or added line of business. And costs incurred by others, these are estimated expenses that go beyond those borne by King County, and they are expenses incurred by others in the region like component agencies or private agencies. So now that I've walked through the background information of the Clean Water Plan and the actions, I just want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I know some of this information is, you've heard it before, but now I'm going to pass it over to Darcy, who will share with you where we are on the agenda and pop up another poll for you to participate in. So thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. I just wanted to reiterate for folks that the slides and a recording of today's workshop are going to be posted online within a few weeks. As you can see, we are now about to head into our next presentation on asset management, resiliency, and redundancy key concepts before we will then have our first Q&A session. Right, next slide. To start this section off, we have a quick trivia question. Just for fun, pick the option you think is the correct answer. What is the size of the wastewater treatment division for King County service area in square miles? So the choices are 78 square miles, 290 square miles, 387 square miles, 402 square miles, or 424 square miles. Looks like about 2/3 of you have voted. Anybody else want to hazard a guess? Feel free. Okay. pretty significant range of guesses, so not full agreement, though everyone is mostly certain that it's not 78 square miles. The answer is E, 424 square miles. So congrats to the 35% of you that got that. Okay, we're now going to begin our next presentation on asset management, resiliency, and redundancy key concepts. So I will hand it over to Elizabeth Lowell.
Great, thank you, Darcy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Lowell. I'm with HDR, and I am acting as a technical consultant supporting the Clean Water Plan. So I will be going over some key concepts that describe asset management, resiliency, and redundancy, and I will start that conversation with what do those terms mean? And I won't read these definitions out, but I want to summarize a little bit as these terms are quite broad. So when we say asset management, we kind of mean just that. So those are the decisions that are made and the costs incurred to own and operate the county's physical infrastructure and deliver wastewater services. Resiliency really focuses on how physical infrastructure withstands an event. So an event could be an earthquake. And then redundancy is a component of resiliency because it helps the county to continue delivering services when a big hazardous event like an earthquake occurs. So every day, the county makes decisions on how to manage infrastructure, capital assets. And these decisions are really designed to minimize cost while still delivering the service of cleaning the water that people use every day. So the graphic on the slide kind of shows the full life cycle of an asset, which isn't that different from like a car or an other item you might, own or interact with every day. So in the cycle, an asset like a pump is bought or acquired, and then there's decisions that are made as to how frequently to perform routine maintenance, when to rehabilitate components of a particular piece of infrastructure. And then finally, when that asset isn't performing to the level we want, then there's a decision about, is it disposed or replaced? And I do want to note on rehabilitation, what that term means. It's not a full new asset. So for example, if you think of a pipeline in the ground, you might completely replace it, or you could use a solution that just relines the pipe to repair things like, cracks or corrosion. So there's a little bit of a distinguish there between rehabilitation and replacement. You may also hear me say renewal throughout the presentation when we discuss actions, and that simply means any capital work. So that comprises both rehabilitation and renewal. So of course, the cycle isn't always quite so clean as that. Sometimes an asset isn't performing like we think it should be performing, and maintenance has to be done that really wasn't planned. So it wasn't part of our proactive program. And then we also have to balance costs of upkeep of the system with other needs. And so there might be decisions to delay, say, a rehabilitation that's needed. So in this case, that need or the value of that need, what that would cost to do the rehabilitation, is what we call backlog. So that's really capital work that we think may need to be done, but instead we decide to continue to perform maintenance or do other things to keep something operating. So you can kind of see the graph with the backlog there in yellow. The cost of maintenance with that asset might go up. We might have to increase the maintenance we're doing because we haven't done this rehabilitation that we think we might need to do. So system performance is also a really big component of the asset cycle. So failures are a performance issue, and they're simply something that happens when infrastructure isn't performing as it should. So they can be big or small. They might result in a spill of wastewater. They could be an impact to a treatment process, and so on. You know, sometimes failures are unavoidable, sometimes they are. So again, if you kind of look at the graphic and the life cycle, you can see that if routine maintenance isn't performed, you might see a failure occur. And then when that happens, a full replacement of that particular asset might be needed, but those costs could be higher than they would have been if the replacement had been anticipated and planned, and it happened before the failure occurred. So I just want to stress too that there really are a number of reasons why maintenance might not happen or rehabilitation is delayed. And those really come down to managing costs and balancing asset management spending decisions with other critical needs. So in terms of King County's physical infrastructure, there are a lot of assets to maintain. You heard how large a service area it is. And they're very different types of assets. So just given the size of the system and the number of people that the system serves, it would cost, upwards of about $20 billion to build the whole wastewater system from the ground up. So, asset management decision making is really, really important. And you can see there, and I just want to point out that some of the county's infrastructure is really quite old. Some of the pipelines in the ground are 100 years or more. So, as assets age, the likelihood that work is needed really increases. So just to revisit the asset management cycle one last time, the big question is, where are the county's assets in this life cycle? And the answer is many are really getting to the point that they can't be just maintained anymore, and they do need to be replaced. So there's some big decisions coming up on how to manage that. So shifting to the resiliency side of the discussion today, that's less to do with daily operations and decision making of the system, maintenance, and more to do with preparing for the future and acute events that might occur. So you can see from that wheel graphic there on the right that there's kind of 4 phases of resiliency and resiliency planning. So those are preparedness, being ready when an event occurs, your response kind of in the initial days and weeks of the event, recovery, which typically takes quite a lot longer, and then mitigation. So how do you prevent it from happening in the first place or from happening again? And the Clean Water Plan is really considering 2 what we call hazard events, and those are earthquakes of seismic activity, and then the impacts of sea level rise. I'll also note that other climate change impacts like precipitation changes and rainfall, that kind of thing, are considered more when we talk about specific types of infrastructure like the conveyance system, because they're impacted a little bit differently depending on the type of the infrastructure. So we've touched on this a little bit. Why is investment in the county's infrastructure so important? And at the end of the day, the county is really working to protect water quality by conveying and treating wastewater. So if the infrastructure is not there to do that, then the county can't really provide those services, and there can be some consequences, right, that result in untreated wastewater leaving the system. And then there can certainly be some impacts to surrounding areas. If you see in that kind of dramatic photo, which shows a sinkhole that formed above a collapsed sewer pipe. So, there are some pretty important consequences. And of course, some assets are going to have a comparatively, larger risk of having these kind of negative impacts. And so we think of that as what we call asset criticality. I do want to note regulations here. So spills of untreated or partially treated wastewater are regulated by the Clean Water Act. So that's managed here in Washington State by the Department of Ecology. So when spills do occur, they're reported, and then a review of what happened is completed. And then the county also monitors water quality, and you can see there on the map that there's monitoring stations in a number of locations that's showing Carkeek Park, Golden Gardens, and Discovery Park. And this is important because spills of untreated wastewater can have temporary impacts on, beaches and use of water bodies in that way, and then shellfish harvesting. So to kind of wrap up the key concepts, why is the Clean Water Plan exploring asset management, resiliency, and redundancy actions? So the Clean Water Plan is really trying to answer the question or determine what investments should be made to care for infrastructure, how risk can be managed, so risk of spills and other things happening, and then what level of resiliency is really needed or appropriate to manage climate change and seismic impacts. And what we're seeing today is that age and use of the wastewater system really impacts its performance and its reliability. And when performance declines, that's when that risk of spilling untreated wastewater goes up. Portions of the system are already at risk of decline. They're getting older. And then much of the system is vulnerable to earthquakes, and then coastal areas, so along Puget Sound, are vulnerable to sea level rise. And next slide. Alrighty, so that kind of wraps up our key concepts, and now I'll move into a discussion of the actions in the decision area. So we'll talk about those here now. To next slide, thanks. So just as a reminder of the process, Sonia talked about this a little bit, but we're discussing actions here. So actions are the building blocks of the plan. They're individual projects or programs that we're going to build strategies. So they're not standalone. This is a step in the process, and we'll be packaging these actions together to provide more of a comprehensive approach to the wastewater system going forward. So the asset management, resiliency, and redundancy actions do make up one of those Clean Water Plan decision areas that was talked about in the video. So that's aging sewer systems, natural disasters, and climate change. So we use those terms kind of interchangeably. All right, so getting into the action. So the Clean Water Plan is evaluating 4 reinvestment actions, and we'll step through each of these 4. One is an action that looks at proactive asset renewal, where the backlog, and remember that backlog is a value that's not being addressed, is decreasing. Another action where it's kind of managed at a neutral level. And then a third where it's increasing. And then finally, an action that looks at no proactive investment. It's all unplanned. And then we also have one action that's looking at an adaptive approach to facility protection with sea level rise. So I'll step through the program overview and kind of characterization of each. And then just as a reminder, there is an actions document that has more information. So you can kind of probably guess from the spread of the actions, but they range from less planned investment to more planned investment, where planned investment is really investment in the system based on mitigating risk before a failure occurs or to avoid failures. And effectively, when there's more planned investment, there's a decreased risk of spills and overflows. And then when there's less investment, the backlog, so that value of renewal that might be needed but is delayed, will grow over time. Alrighty, so getting into the first action. This action is designed to proactively invest in the wastewater system in order to decrease the value of the projected backlog of renewal needs. So we're focusing on assets that need attention now, and we weren't maybe able to invest in those before, and then assets that will need attention in the future. So a way to think about this is if you kind of look at the graphic on the right, if the arrow represents what the estimated system need is, this action would invest to the full need. So we'll see this arrow change a little bit as we go through. But part of the Clean Water Plan process in developing these actions really was to estimate how much renewal is needed over the 40-year plan horizon. And that's based on a variety of factors like the number of assets, their age, and then their cost to replace. So this action also invests in seismic resiliency, and it looks to retrofit all the vulnerable critical infrastructure by 2035. And then the conceptual components really kind of represent guidelines for the future. So in this action, the county would invest at a rate of over 2% of the total system value. And then that estimated maintenance ratio, that planned to emergency or unplanned, would be 80 to 20%. And then finally, it would take about 45 to 55 years to spend the equivalent of the total system value. So for this action investment level, we can expect to see a reduction in spills, but with kind of a negligible change to water quality. And then really large spills that would impact a lot of people are pretty unlikely to occur. So on the graph, in the graph on the right, it's kind of a graphic demonstration of what that looks like. So the green crosshatch there shows the estimated spill volume reduction at this investment level. In terms of conceptual program planning estimates, it's about 15 to 37 billion over the 40 years for renewal, and just shy of $1 billion to about $2 billion for administrative costs. And then, as I mentioned before, the backlog of deferred renewal declines down to nothing by 2060. So why is there an extra 20 million for emergency work? I want to point that out. So it's pretty common in the industry to see emergency work cost more than planned work. So any emergency work effectively has a cost premium, so it costs more to do that work. So although this action minimizes emergency work, you can never really eliminate it, so that's why there's still a little bit that we see there. So moving on to the second action, this action is designed to proactively invest in the wastewater system in order to manage the value of the projected backlog of renewal needs. So in this action, we're really focusing on assets that need attention now. So again, using that arrow as kind of a visual of the concept, you can see that the investment level doesn't quite reach the amount of projected system need. So the assumption here is that more maintenance would be needed and there would be a little bit more unplanned work needed to continue to deliver wastewater services. This action is also investing in seismic resiliency, aiming to retrofit all the vulnerable critical infrastructure by 2045. And then again, those conceptual components really represent a guideline for the future. And it's looking at an investment at a rate of up to 2% of the total system value. And then that maintenance ratio shifts just a little bit to be about 70% planned to 30% emergency. And it would take 50 to 60 years to spend the equivalent of the total system value. Alrighty, so third action for this action and investment level, we would expect to see minimal spills, and kind of negligible water quality impacts again. And again, very large spills that impact a lot of people are probably not going to occur. Our graphic on the right, because there's sort of not much change, you can see there's no crosshatch in that graphic. In terms of cost, it's about 13 to 33 billion for renewal, and again, just shy of $1 billion to about 2 billion for administrative costs. Mentioned this earlier, but the backlog of deferred renewal is consistent across the planning horizon. And then because there is some of that backlog and more unplanned work, we do see higher amounts of that cost premium that I described before. All right, third action. This action is designed to proactively invest in the wastewater system, in this case, to focus on the most critical assets. So there's not, there's no proactive investment in everything that needs attention. So again, if you kind of use that arrow as a guide, you can see that the investment level is even less the amount of the projected system need. So the assumption, again, is that you need more maintenance. There's going to be some more unplanned work that's happening. The action also does invest in seismic resiliency, but only opportunistically, meaning that if work is already being done on an asset that's vulnerable for another reason, then retrofits would be made in that case. And it is anticipated that all of those retrofits for earthquakes would be complete by 2060, or the end of the plan horizon. In terms of conceptual components, this action would invest at a rate of up to 1% of the total system value. And then that maintenance ratio shifts again to be about 55% planned to 45% emergency. And it would take about 140 to 150 years to spend the equivalent of the total system value. So we can expect to see spill volumes of untreated wastewater increase, and there would probably be some temporary spikes that do impact water quality. Very large spills that impact many people could occur over the plan horizon at this investment level. So the orange crosshatch in the graphic kind of represents that increase in spill volumes. And then in terms of conceptual program planning estimates, it's about 8 billion to 21 billion for renewal. Again, we're just kind of still in that just shy of 1 billion to 2 billion for administrative costs. And then the backlog is going to grow, and that growth is going to accelerate over time. So towards the end of the planning horizon, it's going to be getting faster and faster. And then because of that growth, we do see more unplanned work and higher amounts of that cost premium. Slide, thanks. All right, so our last asset management and resiliency action. So in this action, no money is proactively invested in the system to avoid failures. But of course, investment will have to be made when emergencies and failures occur. So again, if you kind of use that arrow, you can see there's just no investment level. So the assumption being all the maintenance and the capital renewal is not planned. In addition, there's no investment in seismic resiliency. I will note, though, just to be clear, that any new infrastructure that's built or an emergency infrastructure replacement has to be built to current seismic code, so that that doesn't change at all. So conceptual components, investment only occurs post failure, as we said, and because of that, that estimated maintenance ratio really kind of flips. You have about 20% planned to 80% emergency. So we can expect to see spill volumes of untreated wastewater increase pretty significantly, with more temporary spikes impacting water quality. And then those really large spills are pretty likely to occur, and they could occur frequently over the 40-year plan. So the orange there shows that increase in spill volumes. Conceptual program planning estimates, the cost is about 22 to 55 billion for renewal. And then there's no planned administrative costs, and then the backlog of deferred renewal grows really pretty quickly. And of course, that emergency cost premium gets really quite high because there's no work that's planned, so we can expect everything to have a little bit of a cost premium. Next slide, please. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 actions that describe investment in the system to kind of preserve system health and address earthquakes. I'd like to shift gears now and talk a little bit about climate change and sea level rise. So the county has made efforts to plan and prepare for the likely impacts of climate change on county-owned facilities, services, infrastructure, natural resources, that kind of thing. And then also to provide services that support the region and really build resilience when it comes to climate change. The kind of the cornerstone of that is the Strategic Climate Action Plan, or the SCAP. And development of the Strategic Climate Action Plan relied a lot on community engagement to explore the impacts and really develop programs and projects that support communities. So among other things, because there's certainly kind of a mitigation component of greenhouse gas emissions and things like that included. But in this context, we're talking about the SCAP considering the impacts of climate change, how those impacts can be planned for to improve resiliency. And then of course, because climate change really impacts everyone, how the response can be coordinated regionally. So looking at specifically at the wastewater system, there are a number of impacts that sea level rise can have on infrastructure and operations. And that map on the right kind of shows, infrastructure that's been identified as being impacted through some modeling that the county has done based on international climate change models. So you can see that the impacts are really pretty heavily concentrated along the shoreline with Puget Sound, and then the tidally influenced Duwamish waterway. So infrastructure, the types of infrastructure that's impacted are things like conveyance system, pump stations, regulator stations, wet weather facilities, and then the regional treatment plants themselves. They're in those vulnerable areas. So what are the impacts? We're talking about things like surface flooding. So think about rising bathwater, sort of overflowing a bathtub. Precipitation flooding within the context of sea level rise with things like storm surge during rain events. Salt water flowing into facilities during high tides and storm events. Hydraulic impacts. And what that really means is it lessens the system's ability to use gravity to move wastewater. And then lastly, rising groundwater tables. So the Clean Water Plan with sea level rise is really exploring an adaptive approach to climate change. And that simply means that, as the impacts of sea level rise become apparent, they'll be managed using the best solutions available. And the reason for an adaptive approach is that actual sea level rise is very difficult and complex to predict. And it really relies on a lot of different scenarios with a lot of different probabilities of occurring. There's also a lot of complexity and interconnectedness of impacts. So an example is if you think about the size and the frequency of storms, that's changing. Those storms might occur at the same time that there's a high tide, and that can impact facilities. So, there's really a lot of variability. And the image on the right just shows kind of what would happen to, in this case, a conveyance pipeline and a pump station in the event that the county experienced 2 feet of sea level rise by 2060, which based on international modeling has about a 1% chance of occurring. So in the adaptive approach, King County can really kind of do 3 things: some hardening of infrastructure against impacts. So that's examples are like sealing the interiors of maintenance holes or covers to prevent saltwater intrusion. There's operational solutions, so like pumping strategies to address flooding impacts. And then certainly some individual capital projects if an asset needs to be, regraded, or there's something that can be done to mitigate climate change for an individual individual asset. Alrighty, so kind of to sum up our takeaways here, past investments in infrastructure have really greatly improved water quality. We see vastly less bacteria in our water bodies than before the regional system was in place. Because of the size of WTD's system and the cost to replace its infrastructure, the management of the renewal backlog really requires substantial staffing and financial resources, and that's really regardless of the investment level. I think I've noted this a couple of times now, but unplanned work or work in response to a failure really can cost significantly more than planned work. So spending less now can actually cost more in the future. And then finally, when investment's delayed or put off, that really puts pressure on the system, it puts pressure on maintenance resources, and it can lead to increasing system failures. We do want to touch on kind of equity opportunities. So how can actions related to this decision area be made more equitable? So I'll just note that work on infrastructure, especially pipelines and pumps that are located out in the county, can really impact the communities where work has to be done. But at the same time, failures of any infrastructure can also cause some temporary impacts to communities from a public health and water quality perspective. So there are some opportunities for equity here, including kind of managing those impacts, specifically looking at infrastructure that's at risk of failure that's located in a priority community might be prioritized to be addressed. Emergency response planning can take into account the resiliency of different communities. So there's definitely some planning level work that can incorporate that. And then, of course, as with all capital work in the wastewater system, there are opportunities for priority communities to engage in, contracting, hiring, training, and that kind of workforce development. And then finally, it's really important to include community considerations in things like the development of emergency response plans, climate preparedness, and everything that the community might need to be more resilient. So finally, as we mentioned, the actions are not standalone. They certainly interconnect with other decision areas. And asset management, resiliency, and redundancy really impacts all the decision areas that involve hard physical infrastructure. So wastewater treatment, conveyance, stormwater, and then the combined sewer system. And that's for a couple of reasons. So any new infrastructure, built for, say, treatment, means there's new assets to be managed, and those need to be factored into any investment level and renewal strategy. At the same time, improvements to different areas of the system might also lead to some renewal of assets. So an example is if a pipeline is replaced with a bigger pipeline that has more capacity, that also kind of replaces that asset, right? So that asset might have been deteriorating and that's now been replaced. So we want to factor that kind of thinking into our renewal investment as we build the strategies. And then finally, certainly the performance of any investments that are made in infrastructure. So like new treatment technologies really rely on how well those assets are maintained and managed, which of course gets back to the investment level that moves forward. So I think with that, I will turn it back over to Darcy.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That does bring us to our first question and answer session. You can please type your questions into the question and answer box on your Zoom toolbar. And please note that's different than the chat box. It's just a separate button. We really appreciate folks typing questions into the Q&A box because it does help us with tracking them. We have had a number of questions come into the Q&A box, which is great. We do have some subject matter experts available to answer questions in addition to our presenters, so we're going to get right into those now. All right, our first question, are you including health effect costs, human health effect costs in the estimates? Ian, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. So I think where the question is going is beyond just where are there actually health effects? Did we monetize what the costs of illnesses are going, or what those costs are? And if that's right, the short answer is we didn't include that. While we do note components of water quality that affect health, like bacteria that might impact the ability to use swimming beaches, or contaminants that can affect the food we eat, or as Elizabeth was talking about with the asset management, if there's failures, and that exposes people to untreated wastewater that can have health effects. So we did note those, but didn't go so far as to actually try to assign a cost to what those health effects could be.
Great, thanks, Ian. All right, our next question. Does the county have a study or plan that identifies the system or assets that would need to be addressed to be resilient to earthquakes? Sonia, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. Good question. So the county did do a study, I want to say, finished up in 2018, that identified risk and mitigation actions, which resulted in a prioritized list of facilities, projects, and programs that we would implement over a time frame. Kind of similarly organized of how Elizabeth explained emergency preparedness, we have a resiliency plan focused more on our infrastructure, and then a recovery plan that focused on more of the actions that needs to deal with our internal processes around how to recover from an event. And the hazards that we did look at were focused primarily on the seismic and liquefaction scenarios, as well as other natural hazards, which included extreme weather, flooding, landslides, and tsunamis. Thanks, Darcy.
Great. Next question, could you tell me what the thinking was to not include volcanic activity in the risk analysis? Heavy ash, for example. Sonia, would you want to answer that one too?
Sure. Yeah, we didn't include volcanic ash. Like I mentioned earlier, it was focused on those 7 natural hazards, which was done in 2018. So yes, no volcanic ash impacts currently that we analyzed.
Which action best describes King County's current level of asset management? Steve, I think this one's for you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Steve Tolsman with King County Wastewater Treatment Division and the Clean Water Plan. And thank you for joining us for perhaps our least interesting, because this is the real bare facts of a wastewater system workshop. So thanks. And along the lines of the bare facts is the infrastructure and caring for the infrastructure. So where we are currently with asset management is we're a maturing program. The utility itself, the system, was formed about 60 years ago. So we're into our second 50 years of life. The asset management program was formed in the early 2000s, and we've been through a couple asset management plan updates, but still maturing that program. And where we want to go with the Clean Water Plan is providing more guidance, more goal setting, that's regionally discussed and put out there, and we get input on that to take our program forward and continue to mature the asset management program around that. So we're not at a specific point that relates to any of those actions. Where we are is on a maturity path, and we want to have the conversation about which one of those actions levels we want our destination to be.
Right, next question. With many contaminants entering the wastewater treatment system, what is the county doing to ensure contaminants in reclaimed water, which may transfer to crops from soil through root uptake, migrate into local drinking water wells and surface water, affecting fish and wildlife, does not happen? For example, I believe test results of King County reclaimed water shows PFOAs above the state water quality advisory levels. For that one, we'll turn to Erica.
Thanks so much for the question. This is a really good question. King County, of course, follows rules and regulations that include safety precautions for PFAS and other chemicals of emerging concern. And so we are actively tracking the research around this and any regulations that might emerge. What I can tell you is that reclaimed water has been used safely in irrigation in Washington state and around the US for more than 20 years. And we do follow all state regulations adopted by Washington State Department of Health and Ecology, including meeting all the regulated water quality parameters. So it's an issue that we are definitely aware of and looking at and continuing to track. Thanks.
And Erica, I wonder if you might just define or explain PFOAs for those who might not know that acronym.
Yeah, PFAS are per and polyfluorinated alkyl compounds, and there's some 3,000 of those compounds in existence. They're used. It's a very persistent chemical. The chemical bonds are hard to break, and so it's hard for it to break down in the environment. It's something that's found. It's a water repellent. It's found in firefighting foam. It's found in Gore-Tex. It's found in like Teflon for pans, things like that.
Great, thanks so much. All right, our next question. What are the goals for this decision area and which ones does each action item meet? Each action item has different guidelines, e.g. % investment and % annual maintenance expenditures of total system value, volume of spills, water quality performance improvement targets, etc., making it very difficult to fully understand what the trade-offs are between the options. Please provide the information for all the other decision areas and action items as well. Steve, would you like to answer that one?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Steve Tolzman again. Okay, so I just like to do two things here. First, take us back to the beginning and what Sonia went over on the planning process and what was included in the video. So these are the actions part, and this is foundational. And then we take these into our strategies. So we need to take care of our aging infrastructure. At the same time, we need to invest in our wastewater treatment plants and capacity and our pipes and capacity that you'll hear about next in wastewater conveyance and other areas. So we're taking this apart at the moment in these actions and looking at that. And then to really understand how it all goes together, we put it into the strategies. Now with the asset management specifically, the second part of this I'd say is we're exploring these different investment levels because we want everybody to have an understanding of what an investment level looks like and what we'd expect to get out of that investment level as far as the resiliency and reliability of our system. Asset management happens to lend itself very well to that, that range of investment levels. Our other decision areas don't necessarily line up like that, but and we've mentioned our actions document, and these investment levels are laid out, and the different characterization of those are laid out in that actions document as well. So hopefully all the information you'd be looking for would be contained there.
Thanks, Steve. We had a question come in on combined systems. Wanted to note that our third workshop is actually going to cover wet weather topics, so we will discuss that then. Our next question, why has the county not been more proactive in addressing the backlog to date? What we are hearing today sounds very familiar to what we heard 10 years ago, unfortunately. Can you remind us of the strategy that was adopted previously, i.e. the level of funding and backlog effort that we are under now? For that, we'll turn to Bruce Kessler.
Thank you. Good question. I'm Bruce Kessler. I'm the Deputy Director of the Wastewater Treatment Division, and I've been involved with developing and continually improving our asset management program at the Wastewater Treatment Division for over the last 15 years. So with my involvement, we have been slowly moving toward being more intentional and proactive about our asset management program, moving away from being reactive, being more planned. And in doing that, you know, we are assessing more backlog in trying to be more intentional about how we approach our asset management program. I'm going to say in 2019, we were developing our, I'm sorry, I got to get this. Well, when we were developing our 2021-22 budget, we had proposed a big increase in addressing this backlog. It resulted in a substantial rate increase that we were proposing, and then COVID happened. And, that put undue stress on a lot of utilities. And we just felt like it wasn't the timing to take care of that backlog. So we went with a more moderate rate increase. Doesn't allow us to get to that backlog. We are proposing that when COVID's over, that we do get to that backlog, starting in 2023-24 cycle.
We had a follow-up specifically wondering what percentage of backlog was being addressed per year from 2010 to 2019.
I don't have that number right now.
Okay, next question. In the equity component touched on in the last segment, how are priority communities defined and identified? Sonia, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. And again, a good question. So we've gotten guidance from our Office of Equity and Social Justice in the executive branch, as well as our Department of Parks and Natural Resources. And our definition of priority populations are those of communities of color, Native and Indigenous communities, immigrant and refugees, those with limited English speaking, communities with limited English speaking, and LGBTQ communities, low income populations, and people with disabilities. So kind of encompasses a wide range of audiences and communities.
Okay, thank you, Sonia.
Sure.
Okay. Our next question says, perhaps this will be addressed in part 2 of the presentation, but how dependent is our asset management program on other municipalities, i.e. Seattle Public Utility Asset Management Plan? Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks. Good question. So, yeah, and just to clarify for those who don't know, the county serves a number of municipalities who are collecting wastewater from homes or businesses, and that feeds into the regional system, which conveys that to the treatment plant. So, yeah, so there is some dependency. So we've talked about system performance and how the level of investment really impacts some of that performance, and also that infrastructure that ages over time kind of stops performing maybe as well as we want it to. And really everybody is dealing with that. And one of the results of that, an example is that we can get what's called like infiltration and inflow. We can get water entering the pipes that shouldn't be there. So that's kind of an issue that everybody's kind of working on together, and that asset management can really impact.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. And that's going to be our last question for this first Q&A session. Thanks so much to all those of you who typed in questions. And a reminder, we'll have additional Q&A sessions throughout the workshop as we go. Let's move on to the next slide. And that brings us to our first break. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and we will see you when we get back. Welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone enjoyed the break. You're now going to move into our next presentation on conveyance system capacity concepts. So you can see here where we are in today's agenda. After this presentation and the following one on related actions, we'll have a second Q&A session followed by our second break. Next slide. Now we're going to do another couple of quick questions to get us all warmed up coming back from our break. So our question here is approximately how many miles of pipe are in the King County wastewater conveyance system? So you can choose 400 miles, 1,375 miles, 75 miles, or 250 miles. So again, this is approximately. So whatever you think your closest answer is. Okay. Looks like results were somewhat divided between folks who thought it was 400 miles and folks who thought it was 1,375, with a few guesses in the other options. Those of you who guessed 400 miles were correct. That was the right answer. All right, next slide. And one more quick trivia question for you. What is the largest diameter pipe in the King County wastewater conveyance system? So your choices are 1 foot 6 inches, 5 feet 10 inches, 14 feet 8 inches, or 18 feet 4 inches. So again, this is the diameter, the largest diameter pipe. All right. Looks like most folks thought it was either 14 feet 8 inches or 18 feet 4 inches. And yep, that option C is the correct one, 14 feet 8 inches in diameter. That's a big pipe. All right, thanks for answering those quick questions with us. And we'll move on to our next slide. I'll now hand it over to Nicole to begin the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Darcy. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Nicole Smith and I work as a planner at the King County Wastewater Treatment Division. So this portion of the workshop will cover wastewater conveyance decision area, which considers the level of service for capacity in sewer pipes and pumps, as well as concepts to manage that system's capacity, for example, through reduction of infiltration and inflow. So to start, we'll cover some key concepts as background to set the stage. Next slide. So what is the wastewater conveyance system? This is a system of interconnected pipes, pumps, and other infrastructure that collects and conveys sewage to treatment plants. So this graphic is showing the components of that system, where wastewater is first conveyed from individual homes and businesses through the side sewer to sanitary sewer mains owned by a local city or sewer district. And then that wastewater is collected and conveyed to the regional conveyance system and to regional wastewater treatment facilities. So without a wastewater conveyance system, the region's lakes, rivers, and streams would be fouled with sewage. And not that long ago, our lakes were more polluted than they are today. And much of the regional conveyance system was created to clean up that pollution about 60 years ago. So focusing in on the King County owned regional conveyance, this is in part a graphic that was shown earlier today. So the King County conveyance does comprise almost 400 miles of pipes, as well as a large number of pump stations. The county has 2 types of conveyance system that conveys wastewater from the 34 component agencies or cities and districts that discharge to the regional system. So the separated system is shown on this map in gray, and the combined system is shown in gold. So most cities in our region are connected to the separated system, and this system is intended to convey wastewater separate from wet weather flows. However, during wet weather, clean water does enter through cracks and defects in that system. The separated system is approximately 2/3 of the total miles of sewer pipe, and largely conveys flows to 2 different regional treatment plants. One, South Plant, is near Renton, and a second, Brightwater, is near Woodinville. So the other portion of the system, or older portions of the conveyance system, are connected to a combined system that intentionally conveys both wastewater and stormwater in the same pipes. And these are found in the city of Seattle. So that combined system is approximately 1/3 of the total miles of pipes. And that portion of the system also includes regulator stations, wet weather treatment plants to manage those flows. Most of those flows go to West Point Treatment Plant in Seattle. So the actions that we'll be talking about today are focused on the separated system, and actions related to the combined system will be covered at the future workshop number 3. But more than just King County manages the full wastewater conveyance system. So local cities, sewer districts, and private properties also own portions of this system. Local agencies own over 5,000 miles of pipes which collect wastewater in their areas, and that those pipes are smaller than the regional King County owned pipes. And there are private property owners who may own thousands of miles as well, conveying wastewater from individual homes and businesses to those local agency conveyance system. But we don't have an estimate for the exact length owned on that private property. Next slide, yeah. So when planning for this conveyance system, we think about the capacity in the regional system and for ways to improve or address public health concerns, minimize sewer overflows, and ensure that the system has sufficient capacity to respond to both the current population's needs as well as future population growth. So for this planning, the county uses a 20-year peak flow design standard to size the pipes in the separated conveyance system. And by designing to this standard, we greatly reduce the likelihood that our pipes will reach their capacity in any given year and overflow. So compared to other utilities across the country, the 20-year peak flow standard used by King County is a high standard. Delivering this high standard requires more projects and bigger projects that invest in major pipe and pump station upgrades. So this graphic is showing that when we build pipes to that current standard of a 20-year storm, sewage only uses a relatively small portion of the pipe, and there is a 5% chance of overflow every year. If we were to build pipes to handle a 5-year storm or smaller storm, as some other utilities across the country do, sewage would use a larger portion of that pipe, and there would be a 20% chance of overflow every year. So currently, the county uses a conveyance system improvement program plan to guide the major upgrades and investments related to capacity in the separated sewer, and reviews those capacity needs approximately every 10 years to identify and prioritize the projects to meet that peak flow standard. So as I mentioned, the 20-year peak flow design standard results in pipes and pump stations that are sized considerably larger than the sewage base flow. And components of that flow include both sewage and clean water that enters through cracks and defects, which is called infiltration and inflow, or I&I. So conveyance capacity needs are driven by several factors shown on this slide, including current sewage as determined through monitoring of wastewater flows from the current population and employment, as well as future sewage, which is determined by projections of population growth and employment growth, as well as current infiltration and inflow, which is entering the sewer system, and future infiltration and inflow, which could be affected by pipe degradation over time, which may allow additional I&I into the system. So this graphic is showing those components, and it also notes that water conservation efforts have been undertaken in the region through low flow toilets and other fixture replacements over the years, but the reduction in flow that we see in the conveyance system is relatively small. So it is estimated that approximately 25% of the total annual wastewater system flow is from infiltration and inflow. And during any individual storm event, as much as 75% of the peak flow in the system is associated with this I&I. So I've been saying I&I a lot. Let's be a little bit more specific. What is infiltration and inflow? So it is excess clean water that enters into the sewer pipes from groundwater and stormwater. And so this graphic is showing the sources of infiltration in white text, as well as the inflow in black text. So groundwater can seep or infiltrate into sewer pipes through holes, cracks, joint failures, or faulty connections. And stormwater from rain events can directly and rapidly flow into the sewers via roof drain downspouts, foundation drains, storm drain cross connections, and through holes in maintenance hole covers. So most I&I is caused by aging infrastructure, and that needs to be maintained or replaced. So both infiltration and inflow quantities often have seasonal variations where heavy storm events result in rain runoff and lead to inflow from those roof drain downspouts and basement foundation drains, and can trigger a rise in groundwater levels, leading to infiltration as the ground becomes saturated. And again, the wastewater, the separated system is intended to only convey wastewater. However, these defects do allow clean water to enter. Next slide. So infiltration and inflow is the primary source of peak flows in the regional separated system. And the more I&I that is in the system, it requires new and larger conveyance pipes and treatment facilities that result in higher costs. Also, more I&I can contribute to basement backups and sanitary sewer overflows. These sanitary sewer overflows are a violation of the Clean Water Act, and so regulatory agencies expect the county to convey these flows downstream for treatment without overflowing. So this graph illustrates the amount of flow in the system in millions of gallons per day over time in days, and the effects of rain events on that flow. So the sewage base flow is shown as the pink line, and over days, that sewage base flow remains fairly constant, with peaks during high water use times of day and low valleys during the low water use times of night. However, when a rain event occurs, as is represented by those gray lines at the top of the graph, that infiltration and inflow can enter the system in many locations and adds clean water flow to that sewage base flow, causing peak flows to increase well above base flows. So in addition to sewage base flows and infiltration and inflow, adding new sewered areas to the regional system can influence conveyance capacity needs. So King County is directed to plan for these new sewered areas, and currently there are 85,000 existing on-site septic systems throughout the region's urban growth area, and those are both in unincorporated areas and in cities. So septic systems treat wastewater when homes and buildings are not connected to the public sewer system, as illustrated by this image of a typical on-site septic system with a holding tank and a drain field. This map shows that a portion of those on-site septic systems are within the urban growth boundary and the county's wastewater service area, which is shown in gray. And the dots represent on-site septic systems. Next slide. So why is the Clean Water Plan exploring conveyance capacity and on-site septic? When focusing on conveyance capacity projects, the actions that we'll be covering shortly seek to explore the investments needed to serve both current and future customers and ensure sufficient capacity is available to improve the overall system condition. And today we are seeing a number of needs and challenges listed on this slide that influence the development of the wastewater conveyance actions, spanning from increased capacity needs to aging infrastructure and the subsequent impacts of those. Great. So now that we've provided some information and background on concepts related to the conveyance system actions, we're going to describe each of the actions being considered under the Clean Water planning process. And to reorient you to the workshop agenda, we're starting the conveyance system actions. And as a reminder of our planning process, King County is exploring a range of actions for each of the decision areas to build the clean water plan. So these actions are conceptual programs or sets of projects that address a single decision area. And some of these actions will require significant changes in how we do things, and other actions are consistent with our current practices. Next slide. So, yep, this portion of the action workshop will cover these wastewater conveyance decision area actions related to level of service for capacity within the separated wastewater conveyance system and management of that capacity. So actions. The Clean Water Plan is exploring several conveyance system actions, which are listed here. These actions include two actions related to conveyance design standards, the 20-year peak flow design standard, which is the current standard, and the 5-year peak flow design standard. There are also two actions related to infiltration and inflow reduction, a peak flow limitation program related to public sewers owned by cities and sewer districts, and a point of sale private side sewer inspection program related to private properties. And the final action is related to the potential addition of new sewered areas to the regional conveyance system through on-site septic systems within the urban growth area. So I'll be presenting an overview to characterize each of these actions, but there is additional detail provided in the actions characterizing water quality investment options document, which is available online, and you can take a look at these sections listed on the slide. So to start, the first action we'll cover is the 20-year peak flow design standard. And this is the current King County policy. It directs improvements of the regional wastewater conveyance system be made to carry the 20-year peak flow. And that flow is calculated through modeling and statistical analysis, and is has a 5% chance of occurring in has a 5% chance of overflow in any given year, excuse me. So this action is being explored to demonstrate the investments needed to accommodate population growth in the region, as well as I&I flows. And this action results in the need to increase capacity through 39 projects. These projects include larger pipes, pump station upgrades, and additional storage tanks for managing peak flows. This map illustrates that these concepts are throughout the service area, and these projects have relatively long timelines for implementation. They can take 8 to 10 years to complete and also require interagency coordination. So in terms of water quality, this action may impact water quality through sewer overflows and temporary increases in the levels of fecal coliform bacteria. Sewer overflows that occur are limited geographically and temporary in nature, which results in water quality impacts that are isolated and temporary as well, although the individuals or communities affected by those overflows are real and need to be considered. So overall, the regional wastewater system does its job well. And this conservative design standard results in the lowest risk of overflows and the lowest risk of impacts to our local water bodies. In terms of the conceptual program planning estimates on the last slide, the planning estimates to deliver these projects do span the 40-year planning horizon and are presented here. These estimates reflect the major capital projects needed to achieve the 20-year peak flow level of service and are in 2020 dollars. The second action is the wastewater conveyance 5-year peak flow design standard. So this action tests a different peak flow standard, and conceptually it is similar to the previous action, but uses this 5-year design standard instead of the 20-year. And as mentioned earlier, this design standard would have a higher risk of overflows in any given year, specifically a 20% chance an overflow could occur. So this action would also accommodate for future population growth and for increasing I&I flows, as was the case for the last action. But this action would have fewer capacity needs and therefore fewer projects. So there are 27 capacity projects that would be needed through this action through the end of the planning horizon. And those also include larger pipes, pump station upgrades, and additional storage similar to the previous action. So for water quality, this action would carry a higher risk and could result in more overflows. Those overflows would be dependent upon the specific storms that occurred over the 40 years. Similar to other actions in this decision area, the impacts would be temporary in nature and geographically isolated, although again, those impacts to individuals and communities absolutely would need to be considered. So from a conceptual program planning estimates perspective, there would be a reduction in the number of projects, and that would result in less capital funding needed, as is represented on this slide. So now we're going to turn to two of the infiltration and inflow reduction actions. And this first action is the peak flow limitation program. And so I&I, as I mentioned before, is the majority of peak flow in the wastewater system and drives the sizing of major capital projects and upgrades. So in this first action, the concept is that a peak flow limitation would be developed for cities and sewer districts discharging to the regional system. And this action would set a peak flow rate to encourage reduction of I&I in those local systems as soon as possible. And that would also derive benefits for those cities and sewer district areas. So the idea is that I&I reduction would occur closer to the source, and that I&I would not reach the regional system, or as much I&I would not reach the regional system. So the peak flows discharged to the regional system could be monitored by the county to track compliance, and some enforcement would be needed along with a non-compliant surcharge fee that could be established if this action was to move forward. So this program would require a lot of technical work to develop the specific peak flow amounts that would be permitted, and then policy or contractual work to put the peak flow limitation in place. So this map shows the wastewater service area and different levels of I&I in the system that were modeled by modeling basin that were monitored in 2010. So areas in gray have the lowest levels of I&I and meet the existing county infiltration and inflow policy, which equates to allowing 1,100 gallons per acre per day of I&I to be discharged to the regional system. Areas in tan meet the peak flow limitation assumed by this action. So this action assumes a 6,700 gallons per acre per day peak flow limitation. And those areas in orange would exceed that assumption. So those cities and sewer districts in orange under this conceptual action would need to complete some I&I reduction projects in their local areas in order to meet the peak flow limitation. Next slide. So in terms of water quality aspects for this action, they're very similar to all the other wastewater conveyance actions. There is a chance of overflow from wastewater conveyance, and those impacts would be isolated and temporary, but are very real for those homes, businesses, and communities affected by backups. So this action represents a shift in how I&I is managed in the region, and that is reflected in these program planning estimates. So there are costs to establish and administer the program where the county would set the policy and monitor flows for compliance. And the county would expect to have some avoided costs for deferred capacity upgrades in the regional system that would result from that I&I reduction in the local collection systems. So the majority of costs for this action would be incurred by the local agencies who would be required to mitigate their I&I in their systems in order to meet a peak flow limitation. So the second infiltration and inflow reduction action explores I&I through another concept, one that is focused on private property side sewers. So I&I technical studies have shown that a large portion of I&I comes from private side sewers. And these side sewer maintenance is currently the responsibility of private property owners. But many may not know this, or they may maintain their pipes to limit basement backups or overflows on their property, but not necessarily to prevent I&I or prevent basement backups on other properties. So today, the cost of I&I from unmaintained private properties is passed on to the region through these capacity upgrade needs. Infiltration and inflow in the system. Oh, excuse me. So this action is being explored because reducing infiltration and inflow results in reducing the need for these wastewater conveyance system upgrades. And this concept would create a program that expands the inspection, repair, and replacement of private side sewers with an inspection program connected specifically to the sale of a property or a permit for a large addition to a home or structure. So for reference, this sketch on the slide shows the private side sewer pipe leaving the home or business and extending across private land to connect to the public sewer in the right of way. And this action assumes that properties are discharging 5 gallons per minute of inflow and 2 gallons per minute of infiltration. These actual amounts vary property by property, but for the purposes of this action, these are the assumptions. So again, water quality impacts are similar to the other wastewater conveyance actions. Just to note that this action is also a shift for the region and how infiltration and inflow is managed. So the conceptual program planning estimates are presented here on the slide, and there would be costs to establish and administer this new program, as well as annual revenues that could come from side sewer certification fees that could help offset the administration of the program. But once the program is developed, the costs would largely be borne by homeowners responsible for undertaking those side sewer inspections and, as needed, repair and replacement. So costs related to inspection and repair could occur approximately every 10 years or so, while costs to fully replace a side sewer would be on a much longer timeline as the side sewer ages, deteriorates, and fails. So even without this program in place, costs are likely to be felt by the property owners as side sewers age and need to be replaced. But with the program, there would be preventative maintenance provided by the program that would reduce emergency costs associated with large one-time repairs or failures. And the program could provide buyers with additional information so they're not caught off guard by major side sewer costs. And for example, a replacement of a side sewer could cost over $10,000. And of course, there's variation in that number as well. So the final action we'll talk about for wastewater conveyance is one that explores the expansion of sewer service within the urban growth boundary and the conversion of on-site septic systems. So the Growth Management Act directs King County and sewer systems directs King County to plan for sewer systems, and that those sewer systems should remain within the urban growth boundary. So this action is being explored to get a sense of regional wastewater system investment needs and water quality characterizations that should on-site septic conversion happen at an accelerated rate within the urban growth area. And the water quality impacts related to converting septic systems to the regional conveyance system are expected to be minimal and primarily related to the reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus. So some key takeaways. In summary, this slide presents some takeaways for the wastewater conveyance decision area. The regional wastewater conveyance system generally does a good job because of that, the region's lakes, rivers, and streams benefit. Over the 40-year planning horizon of the Clean Water Plan, investments in the wastewater conveyance system will be needed in order for the system to continue to do a good job, ensuring that conveyance infrastructure has sufficient capacity to serve all customers, current and future. So the actions in this decision area provide a forward-looking depiction of how the investments could be made and some of the considerations, including sizing of facilities, managing risk of overflows, and reducing infiltration and inflow in the conveyance system. And as the Clean Water Plan has developed and characterized these actions, we've also looked at where opportunities may exist to incorporate equity. So several examples related to the wastewater conveyance actions are here on this slide, and more information can be found in the actions document available online. In relation to the conveyance capacity projects and upgrades, there could be contracting, workforce development, and apprenticeship opportunities aligned with building skills and helping communities acquire better jobs. There also may be an opportunity for equitable access to financial resources for priority communities. So for example, there are potentially negative impacts related to the costs of a side sewer inspection program when a home is sold or remodeled. And those need to be considered and mitigated through financial resources such as grants or rebates or low interest loans or payment plans. Another opportunity, equity opportunity, is to leverage the expertise of community-based organizations. And for example, using culturally appropriate and accessible education and outreach could grow awareness that side sewers are currently owned by the property owner and promote private side sewer maintenance to reduce infiltration and inflow. And finally, there's an opportunity for improvements to equitable service delivery to prioritize conveyance system capacity projects and repair in areas with persistent environmental pollution and community impacts. So for example, planning for capacity upgrades could take into account the consequences of a potential overflow to priority or marginalized communities and time those upgrades to minimize those impacts. So finally, we've just looked at a number of actions within the specific wastewater conveyance decision area. And I did want to acknowledge that there are a number of connections between this decision area and other aspects of the Clean Water Plan. And so the wastewater conveyance decision area connects to other decision areas, particularly those involving infrastructure, those such as the wastewater treatment decision area, asset management, resource recovery, and stormwater and combined sewer systems. So a few examples of these interconnections are summarized here, and they include that increased flows in the conveyance system affect capacity needs at wastewater treatment plants, that aging infrastructure is more susceptible to infiltration and inflow. So as the conveyance system is updated with new infrastructure, that aging or old infrastructure is removed and replaced. New conveyance infrastructure can also be sited and constructed to increase the resiliency from natural disasters and climate change. There's also a connection with that population growth and additional flows from newly sewered areas can result in increased wastewater flows and loads. And those are expected to increase the amount of resources that can be recovered from wastewater treatment facilities. And finally, that removing I&I from the conveyance system may provide opportunities to convey and treat polluted stormwater separately. So I will turn it over to Darcy.
Thanks very much, Nicole. That brings us to our second question and answer session. Just like before, you are very much encouraged to type your questions into the Q&A box so that we can provide answers to them. Several of you have been typing in questions, and we definitely appreciate that. All right, so our first question, this one actually was related to the previous presentation section, which is fine, is how much have you spent on emergency repairs from 2010 to 2020? Elizabeth, would you like to respond to that one?
Sure, yeah, happy to. So data at that level of precision, I think, wasn't really available. It's not tracked by, individual project or maintenance work order. But what I can say is to estimate the costs that I presented during the action description. We used a cost premium of about 3 times the normal cost. And that's a pretty standard assumption. And in fact, EPA actually has it written into some of its asset management guidance guidance. And we took that 3 times factor and applied it to the actions as a projection. So it was really an estimate to look at that potential spending going forward, depending on the investment level.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, next question. Will you be doing a workshop on stormwater CSO and pollution prevention? I can answer that one. Pollution prevention was covered in the first workshop that was on April 20th. You'll be able to look at slides and the recording from that workshop very soon on the Clean Water Plan website. And stormwater and CSOs will be covered in the third workshop, which will take place on May 25th, which everyone is welcome and encouraged to attend. Next question is about what percentage of water is leaked into the system from rain and groundwater, and how can we assess this? I think shortly after this was typed in, Nicole, you actually answered the first part of that. But for the how can we assess this, let's turn to Bruce Nairn. Bruce?
Hi, everyone. Bruce Nairn with King County's Wastewater Treatment Division Modeling Group. Way we assess this is we have meters measuring the flow at various points in our wastewater collection system. We tend to have somewhere between 50 and 100 meters out at any given time. And then about once a decade, we put out a larger number of meters to do a more detailed assessment, having over 200 meters out. And basically, we look at the difference between the flows during rain events and the flows during dry weather to look at the amount of flow that's coming in at any point from the rain. And then we feed this into a sewer model so that we can compare different rainfall events and bring everything to a uniform standard.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Next question was, what is the diameter of the Brightwater pipe? I think Sean O'Neill, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, thank you, Darcy. My name is Sean O'Neill. I'm with the King County Wastewater Treatment Division in the Geographic Information Systems Group. There are several pipes involved in the Brightwater system. Flow enters the treatment plant through 2 pipes measuring 48 and 66 inches respectively, and then travels after it's treated at the plant out to the Puget Sound through over 10 miles of pipe that range from 72 to 14 foot 6 inches, which was the answer to our quiz at the beginning. The bulk of it's about 13 feet and ends in the sound with 2 5-foot diameter outfalls that travel about a mile off the shore to 600-foot deep water and end at 2 250-foot diffusers.
Thank you, Sean. In conveyance system capacity assessment, how are water reuse systems that are located on a specific property, something like the Bullitt Center system, or stormwater reuse systems like cisterns for toilet flushing, accounted for in the calculations? For that one, I think we'll turn to Bruce Nairn again.
Hi, to start out answering this question, I have to say that we don't model flows from individual properties directly. We aggregate our system into by area into various basins and project flows from those. And so 2 parts to this question. Of course, any existing facilities like you're describing would already be included in our existing flows, and so they're accounted for there. And then for new facilities that may be built, those would be included in our assumptions about the rate of increase in flow and associated waste loads as the population increases or over time.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Next question, what % of on-site septic systems are currently failing or at the end of their life cycle? Steve, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Darcy. Hi again, everyone. So I don't have a percentage available today, and but I know you're deeply familiar with this from your work, and thank you for your participation in the Clean Water Plan to date. So my comments here probably are in line with things that you're already aware of. We do know that the on-site septic systems in our region, similar to the regional wastewater system, is on a similar age trajectory. A lot of the development here happened at 60s, 70s. There was a lot of development, 80s. So that puts everything in that 50 plus years. So I think, there's where we're at and there's where we're going. So from an aging perspective, all the infrastructure, both public and private, is aging. And then also from an urban growth perspective, the densification in the urban growth area, the densities would suggest that continued use of OSS in densifying areas would be a challenge.
Thank you, Steve. Next question. Is some of the septic and side sewer I&I cost included in the funds in Senate Bill 914 that just passed? Would that reduce the cost to the county? Tiffany, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Tiffany Knapp with the Clean Water Plan with the county. So as my understanding, and I will admit I'm not fully brushed up on it, but I think Senate Bill 914 is still working its way through. So it has passed the Senate, but hasn't fully worked its way. And it does include, I think, reauthorization of things like the state revolving fund loan and other loan programs and funding. So one of the things I can say is that we haven't specifically looked at that bill for the Clean Water Plan, but the county does look for ways where we can supplement funding through state and federal grants and loans. So we are looking at ways to reduce costs where we can and ways to take advantage of funding that exists beyond just our rates and capacity charges as well.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next, has the material being used to line pipes for I&I, which it looks like plastic, been tested for phthalates? For that, let's go to Elizabeth and let's maybe explain what phthalates are.
Yeah. So phthalates are a material that are used in plastic products. So think like PVC and things like that, that have proved to be, somewhat toxic to human and environmental health when they break down and leach into water bodies. So that's a little quick description. I will say, so to start, there's a lot of different materials that can be selected to either construct pipe or line pipe. PVC is one of those materials. I don't have readily available information on studies that have been done to see the impacts of PVC and phthalates. But I will kind of take us back to workshop 1, which was back in April, and we talked about pollution source control. So the state has a legislation or a law called Safer Products for Washington that's actually exploring phthalates at a statewide level to understand sources, what are the predominant sources, and then what are some ways to control them. So, I think that the county and other agencies are certainly in tune with some of that work that's being done, and the pollution source control action really looks into that. And then the county or other agencies can take results and specify different types of materials to be used. The county doesn't actually specify materials for side sewers. That's municipalities and other jurisdictions that do that. So that's a kind of a brief answer, taking us back to the first workshop.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. On the 20-year peak plan slide, it appears that there's no investments in the Seattle area. For that one, we'll turn to Nicole.
Yeah, so the 20-year peak flow standard only applies to the separated system. It does not apply to the combined system. And the combined system has a different standard. For combined systems, the Washington State sets a standard that no more than one overflow per year can occur on a long-term average. And so there is a different, those projects in the combined system will be covered and considered through workshop number 3. So they are being considered, but they have a different standard.
Great, thanks. And the next question is, can you discuss the equity considerations associated with each of these actions? And I think, Nicole, that one will go to you as well.
Yeah, so I'll kick this off. I mean, so I provided a bit of a summary there at the end about some equity opportunities, and those are closely tied to King County's equity and social justice strategic plan. And for each action, there would be potentially very different equity or equity opportunities. So for the I&I private side sewer inspection program, for example, we're acknowledging that there would be potential impacts to low-income folks, people who are living in older homes who have infrastructure that is likely to fail sooner. There would be a benefit to that program of having financial assistance to support people in still meeting the inspection requirements, but also supporting them to repair their side sewers. So that's just one example of how we're thinking about equity. But again, it would be a little bit different for each individual action. And the actions document that's online does describe at the decision area level, the equity opportunities. So you could dig in a little bit more there as well.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Are composting toilets and on-site treatment a significant solution if scaled by 2040 or beyond? And for that, we'll go to Ian McKelvey.
Hi, yeah. We, at our last workshop, when we were talking about treatment actions, there was a section of actions there talking about decentralized treatment opportunities. So there's a whole range and scale of possible ways that could be applied. Maybe the one that best applies to this question are the building scale on-site treatments, where we were looking at if new buildings or major renovations to existing buildings over a certain size threshold are required to have on-site treatment, what effect that would have. So the outcomes from that, it could have in the long run significant impacts, but they're tied a lot to how development occurs in the region over time. So based on the pace of construction of new buildings and significant redevelopments. So it would be towards the later end of that 2060 end of our planning period where you might start seeing the effects of those on-site treatment systems.
Thanks, Ian. When you talk about separate wastewater systems in King County, what percentage of the stormwater in the areas that have these systems actually gets treated versus just gets released to surface water? Steve, would you like to respond to that one?
Definitely. So a short answer is 19% of the stormwater in the region is treated. We will have a wet weather workshop. Wet weather management will be our third workshop, and we have some graphics to help break this down a little bit more. But with respect to this conveyance topic we're on right now, I just want to note in our separated system, you know, you could separate the three different, excuse me, the three different ways stormwater could go, and Nicole went into the I&I pathway that stormwater could go, making its way into the system, the wastewater system, and be treated, of course, across that separated area, which is largely the east side of the metropolitan area, the metropolitan part of the region, and then south into the Green River Valley and north up towards Linwood. In that area, separated area, you can also have Depending on when development occurred, you would or would not have what's considered current stormwater treatment infrastructure in place. So the part that's not getting in an INI may or may not be getting treated from a stormwater perspective, depending on the time of development. And then of course, if it was developed currently under current stormwater code, there would be some form of treatment included at that point.
Thanks, Steve. And our next question, are on-site septic systems O&M inspection requirements strictly enforced in King County? Steve, would you like to respond to that one too?
Sure. So I just wanted to point some distinctions. So we're, the Clean Water Plan is generally looking at the regional wastewater service area, which also aligns with the urban growth area for the metropolitan area. So there are a lot of OSS systems in the urban growth area. Nicole had a map on her slide, acknowledge that map may have been hard to see. So with respect to those, those are worked under the King County Department of Public Health monitors all the OSS systems. We do work in cooperation with the Department of Public Health to the greatest extent practical on everything inside the urban growth area. So there's two different buckets there, and I don't really know how to break down the enforcement on those two buckets.
Great, thank you. And then it's going to be, I think, our last question of this Q&A session. Is implementation of the INI reduction program predicated on successfully renegotiating contracts with all component agencies to incorporate the program features you've described? Have you considered allowing INI reduction trading between component agencies? Nicole?
Yeah, thanks for this question. So the INI reduction, I'm assuming this is referring to the peak flow limitation program. We acknowledge we would have to revisit and renegotiate contracts in order to put that action into place. And so part of the goal of the Clean Water Plan is to have those discussions and decide which of these actions the region does want to proceed with and move forward with. So for the second part of your question, in terms of INI reduction trading between component agencies, we have not evaluated that to date. So that may be a new idea. I do want to open up to some of our other subject matter experts in case there are examples around that INI reduction trading idea. So Andy Lucas, do you have anything additional to add there?
Sure. Hi, Andy Lucas with Brown and Caldwell. Work on wet weather projects around the country. Usually when trading comes up, it's a situation when the flow limits are orchestrated around the capacity of the system, like a particular part of the system, maybe an interceptor or a treatment plant. And so that trading makes sense when one entity wants to take advantage of another entity's maybe lesser flow or greater flow to that interceptor, and it may make sense to do that trading. And that's where I've seen it utilized in that way.
Thanks very much. And thanks to everyone who sent in questions for that Q&A session. Let's advance to the next slide. And that will bring us to our second break, which will also be another 15 minutes. So we will see you after the break. Welcome back from the break, everyone. You can go ahead to our next slide. As you can see, we have a couple more presentations which will focus on resource recovery, key concepts, and actions before our third Q&A session and our optional extended Q&A time. But first, we're going to do a couple more quick trivia questions related to resource recovery. Next slide. Our first trivia question is, using loop biosolids is a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase carbon sequestration equivalent to taking 8,000 cars off the road each year. Which of the following is not one of the climate fighting benefits? choices are increases plant growth, which removes more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, substitutes for synthetic fertilizers that require large amounts of fossil fuels to produce, cools the surface of the soil, helping to lower regional temperatures, or increases the amount of organic carbon stored in the soil. So again, we're looking for which of these is not one of the climate fighting benefits of loop biosolids. Leave this one open a little bit longer because it's a bit of a tricky one. Okay, all right. So it looks like most folks thought it was going to be cools the surface of the soil, helping to lower regional temperatures. And you are correct. That was the right option. So all three of these other choices are climate fighting benefits of loop. Right, our next slide. Okay, this is our last trivia question. In 2020, the King County Wastewater Treatment Division produced enough renewable electricity to power how many homes? 500 homes, 800 homes, 1,200 homes, or 1,600 homes? All right. Looks like the most popular answer was 1,200 homes, and then with a close to even split between folks who thought it was 800 and those who thought it was 1,600. The correct answer is 1,600, enough renewable electricity to power 1,600 homes. All right, thanks for playing along with our trivia. With that, I'll hand it over to Ian for our next presentations.
Hi, thanks, Darcy. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ian McKelvey. I'm with Brown & Caldwell, consultant supporting the planning process, and I'll be talking to you today about resource recovery. So resource recovery, we're talking about several different options for things that can be recovered from the wastewater in our region, including energy, both in terms of how it's used and how we can recover it, nutrients and organic matter in our wastewater, as well as cleaned water that from the treatment process. The county has been doing resource recovery ever since there's been regional treatment in our region. When that began in the 1960s, the county's really been a pioneer on this, doing cutting edge energy recovery equipment since for more than 50 years, having a successful biosolids program for over 40 years, and recycling water on site for non-potable uses. So another important part of resource recovery is that King County's 2020 Strategic Climate Action Plan. For that plan, resource recovery by the Wastewater Treatment Division plays a really important role in terms of how energy gets used to manage wastewater in our region, and also how we can recover resources from that wastewater. So a little background for everyone about when we're talking about resource recovery, where does that happen at the wastewater treatment plant? So this image is a simplified process flow diagram for the South Treatment Plant in Renton. So we're using this here as an example, but all of King County's wastewater treatment plants have similar applications where resource recovery can occur to different degrees. So the three circles, the top one there is recycled water, which we can recover from the treated water from the wastewater treatment process and use that to offset the use of potable water in our region. That recycled water really depends on what type of or what level of wastewater treatment we do at the treatment plant. So because of that, we covered that in our last workshop when we were talking about the treatment plant actions and the different levels of treatment that we could do. So we won't be talking about recycled water more because that's tied more to those decisions about what level of treatment we want to be doing at our treatment plants. the second circle there is for that nutrient-rich organic material that we recover from the biosolids. That's material that King County recovers 80 tons of biosolids each day and uses it to close the nutrient cycle for agricultural and forest land. So that's one important aspect of resource recovery that we want to look at as part of the Clean Water Plan about how we manage our biosolids in the future. And then the bottom circle there is showing how energy is recovered at South Plant, largely showing how biogas, the methane-rich gas that's produced in digesters, gets recovered and used to meet needs on site and to produce a renewable energy source. So things like energy recovery, that's also an important aspect of this resource recovery decision area and how we make investments in the future there. So King County, for these resource recovery actions, like I said, we're going to be focusing on the biosolids and energy side of things. King County has two existing programs, a biosolids program and an energy program that focus on those topics. So I want to give a little background on those two existing programs before we start talking about the actions. So the first one is the biosolids program. Like was introduced in that trivia question, the biosolids King County produces are sold as loop. So that top middle picture there you see of loop trucks, you might see those driving around our communities, transporting biosolids between the treatment plants and out to where the biosolids end up being used. King County's biosolids program is a Class B biosolids program, which means that the biosolids have been treated to a degree that's considered safe for use on sites that have been permitted by the Washington State Department of Ecology, but can't be used by the general public without further treatment. So for over 40 years, like I said earlier, the county's been beneficially using these biosolids, partnering with entities out in Eastern Washington to use them for agricultural land and in Eastern King County for forest land, trying to use those to recycle the nutrients in our biosolids back into the soil, close the nutrient cycle, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and support plant growth and carbon sequestration. So the top left image there is a picture of biosolids being spread on forestry land, and in the middle bottom picture is showing biosolids being spread on agricultural land. And these biosolids are really beneficial for plant growth. There's two images there. The bottom left one there is showing a cross section of two trees grown, the one on the right without biosolids and the one on the left with biosolids. You can see how dramatic the growth for those trees improves with the application of nutrient-rich biosolids. Not only do you see how much bigger the tree is, but you can even see where when the biosolids started to be applied by when those growth rings on the tree on the left really started to spread out and the growth really took off. The same is true with the agricultural land. Biosolids are used to grow things like wheat, and farmers in Eastern Washington love this material. Helps them increase their crop yields, doesn't increase their costs at all, and it helps them improve the environment at the same time. So it's been a really successful program. So then this next, speaking of the energy program, like I said, the energy program focuses on recovering energy, but more importantly, also focuses on trying to conserve energy and reduce how much energy is used in the first place. So the energy program does that by participating in capital projects to make sure energy efficient designs are being implemented, and also to look for ways to improve energy efficiency in our existing facilities. So as an example of that, the image on the top right is of the aeration basins at Brightwater during construction. So aeration can be one of the most energy intensive parts of the wastewater treatment process. So during the design of the Brightwater treatment plant, a lot of emphasis was put on making sure that aeration process was as energy efficient as it could be. So really trying to maximize or minimize how much energy got used there in the original design. But even then, we're now about 15 years since Brightwater began operation, and there's been even more advances in technology since that time. So just last year, the energy program participated in a project to upgrade the aeration system at Brightwater, and we'll be reducing energy use by 2 million kilowatt hours a year as a result. So the other images here are showing on the flip side on energy recovery how biogas is used at the wastewater treatment plants. The image on the top left is at the West Point treatment plant, where gas is burned in engines like that image shows to generate heat that's needed for the process, but also renewable electricity that can reduce how much non-renewable electricity is used. The image in the middle is showing at the South treatment plant towers that are used to purify the digester gas so that it can be used to replace fossil fuel-based natural gas energy sources. And then the images on the bottom left and the bottom right are showing examples where biogas is used to produce heat for process needs. On the bottom left is a boiler at Brightwater that's used to meet the energy needs, the heating needs at the treatment plant. So with that background, why are we exploring resource recovery in the Clean Water Plan? Basically, the question is, as much investment and focus has been put into the existing programs by King County, do we as a region want to invest more attention and more in these programs to increase our resource recovery? So if we do want to put more investment into these areas, what should we be investing in? Answering those questions will help us address some challenges that we expect to face in the coming decades. One of those is that a Class B biosolids program like the one King County uses now, as much benefit as it has, does face a challenge in that it has a limited number of customers and markets that the material can go to. So if those markets aren't available to King County, then that can really put challenges on where these biosolids can be beneficially used. Another challenge is that Strategic Climate Action Plan I was referring to establishes ambitious targets for the county in terms of energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions. So how we invest in our resource recovery programs will be important to defining how we're able to meet those ambitious targets. So with that preamble, we're ready to talk about the resource recovery actions we looked at as part of the Clean Water Plan. On the next slide, I think we've got schedule, so we'll spend the next 10 minutes describing the actions. Then, as a reminder, we're still here the actions phase of our plan, speaking to individual programs, but we'll eventually be moving on into strategies and see how all these things come together into a holistic alternative. So we're still talking about individual programs. And then also a reminder of our list of decision areas. We're talking about the decision area that's focused on how we recycle resources from wastewater. So for the Clean Water Plan, we looked at 2 different resource recovery actions. The first action looks at, considers if we use our existing resource recovery programs and just keep them where they are today for the next 40 years, what sort of outcomes might we expect? What would that future look like? And then the second action asks, well, if we expanded those programs, how might we expand those programs? What sort of benefits and costs might be associated with an expanded program? So if you're interested in more information after this presentation, the actions document that we've been discussing, these are covered in section 8. So diving into the actions, our first one, like I said, is looking at our existing resource recovery programs. What if we maintain those programs as they are for the next 40 years? So it would kind of establish a baseline of what we get from the programs as they are today and what that would mean in the future. So implementing that would mean we'd continue the existing Class B biosolids program, taking biosolids out to Eastern Washington for agricultural land use and to Eastern King County for forest land use. There'd be no change in the treatment levels to achieve a higher, like a Class A biosolid standard. It would still be Class B, but there would need to be capital investment just to maintain our capacity for as growth occurs in the region. We need more capacity for managing biosolids. On the energy side, sorry, I'm still on the last slide. The energy program would continue to participate in capital projects to try to find areas where energy efficiency can be implemented. We'd still be working towards strategic climate action plan goals, including reducing energy use at the wastewater treatment division and meeting a carbon neutrality goal. But there wouldn't be specific investments in new energy recovery facilities. Capital projects for the energy program would be focused on maintaining existing energy recovery infrastructure, expanding capacity when existing systems are reach the end of their life. So on the next slide, in terms of outcomes from this action, if we continue with the existing programs, water quality wouldn't be a major outcome from these programs. One area where it could be affected would be if capacity needs at the West Point treatment plant mean we need to implement more intense digestion process at higher temperatures. That can affect the how much nutrients leave the treatment plant through the treated effluent. But it would be dependent on what levels of nitrogen removal are included in the treatment process. If that's also done with an action where nitrogen removal is included at West Point, you wouldn't actually see any change in the nitrogen levels compared to today. From a planning estimate, you can see some of a breakdown of how much continuing the existing programs would cost. So reminder, these are costs over the full next 40 years. So on capital costs, like I mentioned, there'd be some costs associated with expanding capacity to meet needs as our population grows and replacing existing energy recovery facilities as they age and reach the end of their life. So those costs could be in the on the order of $1 billion. It also takes money to operate and maintain these systems and over time, and so annual costs over the full 40-year period we're estimating would be in the $2 to $5 billion range total over 40 years just to keep the existing programs running. King County does get revenues from these renewable resources that are generated, the renewable electricity that's produced at West Point, the renewable natural gas at South Plant, the biosolids that are sold to end users. So over the 40 years, we estimated that the revenues that would come in from selling those renewable resources would be on the order of a few $100 million. A couple of other outcomes besides the water quality and costs that are important to keep in mind. Like I said earlier, one major outcome from keeping the existing programs is that for the biosolids program, a Class B program is really dependent on only a few markets. The image on the right is showing where biosolids are used, where King County's biosolids are used right now. So if one of those markets or one of those end users is no longer available for whatever reason, then that would put a lot of stress on the program in terms of how we manage those biosolids. Those biosolids get produced every day, no vacations for that. So we have to have a reliable place to send those biosolids. So Class B program, because it requires permitted sites and not used by the general public, is more at risk of those sort of market disruptions. And then the other outcome of note is, like I said, the Strategic Climate Action Plan lays out some ambitious energy use and carbon footprint goals. So if other components being explored in the Clean Water Plan are implemented that significantly increase how much energy we use, so things like if we implement nitrogen removal on the liquid stream of our treatment plant process, then that could really challenge those goals, because those nitrogen removal, for example, is very energy intensive and could make it more difficult to reduce our energy use overall. So that's the first action. Like I said, continuing existing programs. This second action is looking at what if we invested more? What if we really tried to do more resource recovery? What if we set more ambitious goals for ourselves? So we constructed this second action with trying to be innovative, long range thinking. Want to acknowledge that it's hard to predict what the future will be like, especially over the next 40 years. So it's certainly possible that what we have here isn't how things actually play out, but the heart of this action is that the county would continue to stay on top of innovation in these fields and apply those where it made sense from a performance perspective, a reliability perspective, a cost effectiveness perspective, and really try to stay on the cutting edge of resource recovery. So to describe that, what that might look like over the next 40 years, we built this action with a couple of key components. One is we assumed to address that market risk challenge that the county would transition from a Class B biosolids program to a Class A program. That could be done a variety of ways. Some of it would be more intense digestion processes at the treatment plants operating at a higher temperature, like I mentioned. Also could include things like composting biosolids. There's an image there of a biosolids composting facility in Arlington, Washington. And the heart of that is to try to expand the market reach that the county would have for who could benefit from this valuable resource. On top of that, there'd be opportunities to recover additional resources. One concept is bringing more food waste to the source separated food waste to the wastewater treatment plants so that they can be digested along with the biosolids in our wastewater. That it creates more opportunities to beneficially use those products in our region, creates more renewable energy for us to recover. Could also paired with a opportunity to recover phosphorus from the wastewater treatment process, and that phosphorus can be used as another fertilizer replacement. So that's another component we included. We assumed for this action that beyond what's in the current strategic climate action plan, that there'd be even more ambitious energy efficiency targets, to the point where we explored what would it look like if the wastewater treatment division was energy neutral by the end of the planning period by 2060. So that would include being even more energy efficient, seeking even more opportunities to recover energy in the treatment process, generate more renewable energy. And we also included in that the concept of the wastewater treatment division converting all of their vehicles, including those trucks I showed that take the biosolids out to Eastern Washington, converting all of those over to electric to try to improve our carbon footprint. So that's what the second action is. So what outcomes we would expect from that. Similar to the last action in terms of water quality outcomes, water quality isn't significantly affected by these programs. The main tie to it would be, like I said, on the first action, if we went to those digestion intensification processes that release more nitrogen within the treatment process, that could affect how much nitrogen leaves our treatment plants. But again, if we're doing those improvements at the same time that we're doing a nitrogen removal process at the treatment plants, then that increased nitrogen would just be removed as part of that treatment process. So you wouldn't actually see a change to water quality outcomes. In terms of planning estimate costs, as you might expect, if we invest more in a resource recovery program, that would cost more. So the capital costs are increased here because we're investing in more infrastructure, things like if we're going to do a biosolids composting, then we would need to site and build a composting facility in our region. We need to do modifications to the digesters to achieve Class A digestion. More energy recovery means we need to be building more energy recovery facilities. So those capital costs would be on the $1 to $3 billion range over the 40-year period. The ongoing annual costs actually didn't change between these two actions. One while we would have more facilities to operate and maintain, those costs would be offset by how much energy reduction we see. So energy costs would be reduced. And also because we have in this action, we have a Class A program that we don't have to send all the biosolids to Eastern Washington. The transportation costs to get biosolids out to Eastern Washington are significantly reduced here. So ongoing annual costs would actually be unchanged on this action. But then there would be increased revenues because, as I said, the components of this action are more resource recovery. There'd be more renewable energy recovered, more, I mentioned phosphorus recovery. So there's additional sources of revenue coming into the wastewater treatment division. On the other outcomes from this action, again, two things to note. One is, like I said, a Class A program that includes biosolids composting means that we'd need to cite a biosolids composting soil blending facility where that facility gets cited, would have impact on the community around it. So that's of note to implementing this action. Another outcome for this action is even more than the last action. This because it sets even more ambitious energy goals to the point of being energy neutral. If we are also doing things in the wastewater utility to increase nitrogen removal, increase odor control, things that increase our service levels and require a lot more energy, that's going to put those energy neutrality goals at even more risk. We're already at the point of, today's technology might not be able to reach that. We're assuming there's going to be advances in technology that can help us achieve that, but that's going to be even more of a challenge if we're also significantly increasing our energy use for increased service levels. So those are our two actions that we looked at. A few takeaways that we'd like to leave you with. So like I said at the beginning, King County has a long history of innovative and sustainable resource recovery dating back to the 1960s. So resource recovery is something the county has been doing for a long time, is a major commitment for the county. And as a result, at how successful those programs are, the current biosolids and energy programs are important, very important components to meeting the county's strategic climate action plan goals. So from the actions that we looked at, the main takeaways or some significant takeaways are to keep in mind are that transitioning to a Class A biosolids program would significantly increase the availability of that resource to our region. We wouldn't be tied to just sites that are permitted by the state of Washington, but could be used by the general public. Increases the availability of that resource to everyone, and also reduces the risk on King County of finding places to send these biosolids. And then significant investments in energy efficiency, energy recovery, and having a local biosolids product could really shift the needle on how energy is used at the wastewater treatment division and could result in significant reductions there. Next slide. Another important component to everything we're doing on the Clean Water Plan is how we can improve equity in our region. So with these resource recovery actions, there's a few, like I mentioned, the composting facility would require us citing a new facility. And so how that site selection, design, how community amenities are incorporated into that facility would play an important role in how we can address equity in our region. We want to make sure that equity was an important component in all of our decisions associated with that facility. Another opportunity is that the Class A biosolids program could create more opportunities for entrepreneurship and small businesses and workforce development in our region. Things like supplying some of the feedstock for that composting or soil blending facility would be a significant opportunity for partnering with local disadvantaged businesses. The third one there is equitable delivery of the biosolids. These biosolids could provide a lot of value to our local community in terms of addressing food deserts in our community and improving urban soil health. So making sure that the distribution of those biosolids are done equitably and that priority communities get to benefit from that resource would be important. And then the last one is, as with everything we do, want to make sure that we're including community input on how these programs are implemented. During implementation, the county would conduct engagement to hear community priorities and needs and really strive to be responsive to the interests and priorities of historically disadvantaged communities. So last slide here, just connecting back to our other decision areas. How does our resource recovery decision area connect to the other decision areas? As I said, when I was talking about the outcomes, water quality outcomes are really related to what level of treatment we're providing at the treatment plants, if nitrogen removal is included or not. On the excuse me, on the inverse side of that, what level of treatment we implement can also create challenges for meeting ambitious energy and greenhouse gas emission targets. So there's a significant tie there between what level of treatment we do at our wastewater treatment plants and these resource recovery actions. There's also a tie to the asset management program in that if we're putting more investment into resource recovery, building more facilities, more systems and equipment, that creates more infrastructure for our asset management program to manage. So that's a tie there to that program. And then the last one, I didn't speak that much to this one, but the quality of the biosolids depends on what's in the wastewater that comes to the treatment plant. And so an important aspect to any biosolids program is a pollution source control program. The county has a rigorous program that really strives to reduce pollution coming in the first place. So as contaminants of emerging concern and other chemicals of concern are identified and the science develops on those, the source control program will be an important component of maintaining biosolids quality. So I think with that, I will hand it back to Darcy.
Thanks very much, Ian. We've got a few questions come into the Q&A box, and of course, just like last time, you can continue to type in any questions that you have and we will turn to them. First question, what steps are taken, if any, to separate microplastics from the biosolids? For this one, let's turn to Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley Miley. I'm with the biosolids program at King County, and microplastics are fragments of any type of plastic, generally less than 5 millimeters in length. So plastics that are really pretty hard to see with just your own eyes. And they enter natural ecosystems from a variety of sources, anything from cosmetics, think like back before microbeads got banned, clothing, synthetic clothing material like your workout gear, and industrial processes. And so at our treatment plants, we do have screening at the front of the plant, which removes large plastics you can see essentially before they break down into smaller plastics and become microplastics. So that is one upfront control we do have that helps protect the quality of our biosolids and plastic contamination in general, but that doesn't remove things like microplastics. And while there's a wealth of information available about microplastics in aquatic systems, there's not as much known about microplastics and nanoparticles in terrestrial systems, so kind of in the soil system where you apply biosolids. There's not a lot known about the fate and transport of those particles in soil or their impact on soil quality. So the Wastewater Treatment Division is partnering with Washington State University for an ongoing research project on microplastics specifically, and this project will provide, to our knowledge, the first data on whether and how much plastic microbeads and silver nanoparticles have accumulated in soils due to repeated applications of biosolids. So this is a several-year ongoing research project, and sampling has been done at the South Treatment Plant and in the soil at our long-term agricultural research site in Eastern Washington, to a depth of 60 centimeters. We have one of the longest running research sites in the country, actually, for biosolids. And so we're continuing to partner on this and understand its impacts in the soil.
Great, thank you, Ashley. And Elizabeth as well.
Yeah, so just wanted to talk about the pollution source control that Ian mentioned on the last slide. So we discussed this in the first workshop, but there is a pollution source control action, for emerging pollutants that is looking at both microplastics and nanosilvers, which Ashley just mentioned as well in her explanation. And so that action is looking at ways to control sources of both of those pollutants before they enter the wastewater or the stormwater stream.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question. Are the limited markets for biosolids because of the type of the biosolids we produce? Is there another process that would make the product more attractive or marketable? Let's turn again to Ashley for this one.
So that's a really great question. And the product that we currently have, our loop product, is a Class B product. There are two classes of biosolids product under the state biosolids regulations, and Class B biosolids are treated to remove 95 to 99% of pathogens, but they do still have detectable levels of pathogens, which is why they require a permit for use. And there's certain best management practices in terms of how much you can apply and where you can apply them to protect public health and the environment. And the difference with that is that because of those permit requirements, it does require sort of a commercial customer. It requires a lot of land. There's economies of scale in terms of applying that product. The product also does, smell like an agricultural product, and it's appropriate for agriculture, but it needs to be spread with a manure spreader, which is, large scale farming equipment that, the average person just doesn't have. And then the higher class of biosolids is Class A biosolids, and those have virtually no detectable pathogens. So they go through a higher heat or another similar process to remove those additional pathogens. And that means that it can be used by anyone, by you, by me in our garden to grow food, all kinds of really great stuff in landscape and gardening in the region. And it also means that generally, a lot of Class A products like a compost product or, a Class A biosolids that's turned into a soil blend, like the city of Tacoma's Tagro products, they look just like any other garden product on the market. They have, a nice earthy odor. You can apply them with regular gardening equipment. And that really makes it easier for people to use, and that definitely makes them more marketable. So having a Class A product would allow us to access more local markets, more horticultural landscaping markets that we currently just can't access with the product that we have now. We have a really successful, long-running, decades-long biosolids program. We have really amazing customers, but we've sort of gotten those customers as much as we can. We are serving forestry and large agriculture growing crops like wheat, sunflowers, canola in Eastern Washington. And so we are really serving those markets. We have a public-private partnership that manages many other utilities, biosolids as well. And there just isn't a lot more space in that market for more expansion. So we really do need to expand the product we have in order to diversify our program and access new markets and potentially generate more revenue as well.
Oh, thank you, Ashley. Our next question is, can you elaborate on the impact of temperature on biosolid nutrient content? Is it an inverse relationship? Ian, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, so I think this is referring to my comment that if we have to go to a digester intensification process, operates at a higher temperature, that there'd be more nitrogen released within the treatment plant and would end up in the effluent water quality. So where that's coming from is the, like Ashley was talking about, for that Class A process where you get to essentially non-detect levels of pathogens. Those typically have operate at a higher temperature than what the current Class B program requires for digestion. And that higher temperature creates more intense digestion of that material, breaks down the material further, and that breakdown of the material releases nitrogen in the organic matter that otherwise would have stayed in the matter and ended up in the biosolids that were going out in the back end. So that's where that increase in the temperature, it's really increasing the kinetics of the digestion process, releasing more nitrogen, and that's where it comes from.
Great. Our next question. Are there any changes to the amount of biosolids or energy recovery due to changes at the wastewater treatment plants due to the anticipated Puget Sound nutrient permit requirements? Ian, you want to respond to that one too?
Yeah, so we don't really expect an increase in biosolids with nitrogen removal. Most of the growth in biosolids over the next 40 years will be associated with growth in our region in terms of population. As there are more people, that provides more material in the wastewater. Energy recovery, we wouldn't expect that. Similarly, wouldn't expect an increase as a result of the nitrogen removal requirements. But as I said in my presentation, the nitrogen removal process is much more energy intensive than the existing secondary treatment process. So on the energy use side, you would expect energy use to increase significantly if nitrogen removal is implemented.
Great. Have you talked with Tacoma about expanding the TAGRO project? A larger joint facility might save money for both King County and Tacoma. Ashley, do you want to help us out with this one?
Sure. So the city of Tacoma has a really successful biosolids program. We recommend their TAGRO products all the time. We haven't spoken with them specifically about a direct partnership with them. They have their own program, they have their own customers, and we really in King County have the capability to run a similar program ourselves. One opportunity that could come up if we were to, say, site a compost or soil blending facility that was county owned would be to potentially process smaller utilities biosolids as well in the compost facility. But the city of Tacoma itself has a really successful program, and I think it probably makes more sense to just prop them up and continue telling everyone what an amazing product they have. But interagency partnerships and regional partnerships like that are something that the agency looks at. And I can't speak to whether or not it was considered in the Clean Water Plan, but I think the value for King County would be to have more control over the product that we produce and be able to insulate our own biosolids program from risk at this time.
Thank you, Ashley. I think this next one is going to be our last question before we transition into our final few slides, followed by our bonus Q&A time. So question is, what about moving to the new technology developed by Washington State University so that you more or less 10% convert biosolids to energy or fuel with very little residuals, and you would not need to spread it, given the concerns about PFAS, microplastics, and other contaminants in biosolids? Seems like this would be a better route to take than going to Class A. Ian, would you like to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, this question really speaks to the point I was trying to make with the second action, that there's the biosolids market. There's, as long as I've been in it, there's always been innovation going on here. A lot of people, studying new ways to manage biosolids. So there's always been innovation going. That second action would really look at trying to making sure that the county stays on top of that innovation, continues to study it, looks for opportunities where applying that would benefit the county. Challenge with a lot of the innovations in this area are with a utility the size of King County's, you want to make sure that the public money is being spent wisely in terms of systems that we are reliable and proven, and we know are going to work over the long haul and provide benefit both in terms of energy use, greenhouse gas benefits, resource recovery, all these environmental benefits we're talking about, and be cost effective. So things like the technology you're referring to, it's possible over time that those become proven and really meet the needs of the county, and that action too would stay on top of those things. We didn't include here because in this action because it doesn't really meet those thresholds of you can bank on it for the next 40 years, but it's possible, like I said, as innovation develops in our region, it might make sense, and those could be applied in the future.
Okay. Thanks very much, Ian. Ashley, was there anything you would want to add to that, or do you feel like that was pretty much covered it?
I think Ian covered that.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks so much for those questions, and that's going to conclude our third Q&A. And I'll hand it over to Sonia to walk us through our where we're going next slides.
Thanks, Darcy. All right, so where we're going next. So on the next slide, please. What we discussed today was action characterization, which is a fundamental understanding of water quality investment options. And in the next step, we'll be developing complete water quality investment approaches for regional exploration. We also call these strategies. So by the end of this, we'll eventually have an approach to investing in the regional water quality system and water quality. And throughout all of this, it'll be informed by regional input and technical analysis. So thanks everybody for sticking with us as we went through these 3 decision areas and the actions today. We do still have one more session coming up on May 25th to take us through the rest of the actions in the other decision areas. So the third and final workshop will cover wet weather management. And I know a lot of people have interest in that, where we'll explore what it looks like to treat more stormwater within our existing wastewater system. We'll describe actions that include combined sewer overflow control and ways to optimize the way we operate our system and ways to address legacy pollution. Like the last 2 workshops, we will give an overview of the actions water quality performance, conceptual cost estimates, sustainability, and community characteristics. I again want to point you to the resources that's available on our project website. One of them is called the Actions Technical Workshops Content Outline, where it'll give you an overview of the next workshop to help you decide if that's something you're interested in and something you might like to attend. Additionally, in the next step, during the strategy phase, we'll also plan to host engagement opportunities to share the strategies that have been developed and gather feedback from the public, which will then inform our preferred strategy. So please be sure to subscribe yourself and your organization to the Clean Water Plan email list, which can be found on the project website under Join Our Conversation. And additionally, I want to point you to a couple other resources. One is the recordings of the workshop number 1 that has already been posted on our project website, and workshop number 2 will be posted shortly after today. Also, we want to point you to the document that we've referenced throughout this presentation, which is the Actions Characterizing Water Quality Investment Options, where you can find more details on the information we shared in this workshop series. We consider this a supplemental document to the workshop series, so it's a good resource to take a look at. Additionally, there are other resources, which includes the video that we shared at the beginning of this workshop, as well as topic sheets that describe the planning process and what actions are. We welcome you to reach out to us via email if you have any further questions, or visit our website. Like I mentioned, there's a ton of resources there to take a look at. I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and lastly mention that you should expect to receive an email link to the recording of the presentation, along with a 3-minute survey to let us know how you like the workshop. So please be sure to fill those out and give us your feedback. And we hope to see you on May 25th, which is our last and final workshop. But before we log off, I want to pass it to Darcy, who will open it up for additional questions. Thank
you, Sonia. For those of you choosing to depart now, we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we really appreciated your participation in the workshop, and thanks for all the questions. So the workshop's presentations have now concluded, and as we mentioned, you can feel free to head out. If you are interested, you are welcome to stick around and participate in additional Q&A time. Our presenters and our subject matter experts will stick around until 4:30 to answer any additional questions that you may have, and we welcome questions related to all topics discussed during today's presentations. So I will pause here. There's currently no questions in the Q&A box, but if you do have questions, you can certainly feel free to chat those or to enter those into the Q&A box this time. A question just came in. Do the trees that grow more with biosolids have equivalent strength compared to conventional lumber?
I can answer that one. So yes, that little slide that showed the two different tree rings, that was taken from our original research project in the 1980s when we started forestry applications, first with the University of Washington at their research forest, pack forest. And that's actually not the same rate that we apply biosolids today in the forest for our forestry customers. So we do still see quite significant growth increases, but not on that level. And there was some testing done in terms of lumber strength, and the lumber strength for the trees that are grown today is exactly the same. And there's no differentiation in terms of how our customers use those trees. So hopefully that answers your question. But the really, really impressive growth was back in the research trials way at the very beginning.
Our next question, can you expand on the Washington State University biosolids improvement technology?
Yeah, so I can take that one too. So I'm not sure exactly what the technology being referenced was. I did take a quick look at that article, but there are alternative technologies for biosolids, and those generally include things like pyrolysis and incineration. And so incineration is the burning of biosolids at a high heat temperature. That's actually not allowed under our state biosolids regulations, which define biosolids as a valuable commodity and promote the beneficial use of them. And incineration produces, just an ash that gets landfilled. So that's not considered a beneficial use. And pyrolysis is a different technology. Often it's referred to there's some waste to energy technologies, and sometimes that means incineration, and sometimes it means something more like pyrolysis or gasification. And that's heating dried biosolids at a very high temperature in the absence of oxygen. So it creates a product called biochar, which is really sort of like a charcoal product, a gas, and a bio-oil. And in order to use a pyrolysis system, biosolids are 80% water. So you have to actually dry the biosolids first, which uses quite a bit of energy and tends to increase our climate greenhouse gas emissions. So, and then in addition to that, the biochar market is not very well-developed market, which is very different from the biosolids market, which is decades old and quite established. And so it's a bit of a risky market. And Biochar technology, biochar pyrolysis technology is very, very expensive, and to do it on the scale at which we produce biosolids would be very expensive for King County. We looked at alternatives to land application recently for a council-directed report, and that is online, and it's called Alternative Options for the Use of Biosolids per Ordinance 18930. So you can take a look at that report and find out a little bit more about why that alternative option really doesn't meet our climate and environmental goals, and how the costs sort of compare to other options such as a Class A program. So hopefully that answers that question a little bit more.
Thanks, Ashley. Next question. I wanted to circle back to the question about the goals for each decision area. Thanks for pointing to the process goals for developing the plan. I think it's a great process. I would like to know what the goals are for each decision area and how each action within each area meets or doesn't meet them. Steve, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, and thanks for the compliment on the process. First, for a complete listing, complete write-up of the decision areas and the questions within each of them we're exploring, definitely encourage you to look at the actions characterization document that we've mentioned here several times today. Second part on goals for the bigger process, what we're working through in our exploratory process is what are our goals as a region. There are a lot of needs. We're working our way through all these needs within each decision area. There are a lot of needs, and there's different directions we can go. And today we went through 3 of the decision areas and different directions we can go within those decision areas. So we have all these needs, we have these directions we can go, we have 40 years, we're looking out for a planning horizon, and we have a limited number of resources we can put to all this, or we need to adjust our resources in order to shift to goals that we set. So really our goals we want to create with the region through this process, so we have a clean water plan that reflects the region's input, and we're all striving for goals that we've generally laid out and understand.
Great, thanks, Steve. I think that's the last question that was in the question box. We are going to hang out for a few more minutes. So if a question comes to you, you can definitely feel free to type that in. Okay, with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thanks so much again to all of you for sticking with us for these several hours. We appreciate it a lot, and hope to see some more of you at the 3rd workshop. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.